Yeah, great. She should have answered my question. Was she ever a lady? She's but exercise. No, so just 5 years. Yeah. So it's actually, I had to look it up today because I want to make sure. So it's in OC and.
Yeah, it's exciting. Yeah. Well, because I need it for my job, so.
John's not here. John's not here. Right. Gotcha.
Okay, it is 6 o'clock. We will get started. In accordance with Ohio Revised Code 121.22, I hereby call to order the Bexley City School District Board of Education special meeting for August 9th, 2021. I want to start by reading a section of our board protocols, which were reviewed in our board retreat yesterday and seek to approve tonight, in order to focus and center our work here tonight. We, the governance team of the Bexley City Schools, assemble here today with the singular goal of enriching the life of each of our community's children through transformative public education. We recognize that this work can frequently be difficult, as it requires the balancing of often competing priorities and can involve conflict or differing ideas of how to achieve this goal. We therefore agree to assume positive intent for all those assembled here. Only by working constructively together, along with administrators, faculty, staff, students, parents, and community members, can we move closer to achieving this goal. I also just want to add my personal note here that I'm deeply thankful for such dedicated, thoughtful, and hardworking board members. We may not always agree, but we do agree with decency, collaborative process, respect for our office, and the work we do on behalf of our community. For that, I'm eternally grateful. Also, if you're here tonight for public comment, please make sure to sign in the podium in advance. With that, Mr. Smith, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Barnum. Here. Ms. Minio.
Here.
Ms. Mitchell.
Here.
Ms. Powers.
Here.
Ms. Snowden.
Here. Thank you. Mr. Martin, would you mind shutting that door for us? I'm sorry to call on you, but we were sitting right there. Thank you. I think it'll make it easier for people to hear. All right. And then we'll go ahead with the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance
liberty, and justice for all.
Thank you. All right, can I have a motion to approve tonight's agenda, please? So moved. Second. Thank you. Any changes? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, same sign. Thank you. That motion carries. All right, we're going to start off tonight with some work that we need to finish up from previous board meetings. That is the second reading of our policy EBEA, which is our policy on face coverings. And you'll see reflected there the changes that we made in our last board meeting. So this will be a second reading for this policy. We also are looking at revisions for board team protocols and rules that we discussed in our board retreat yesterday, as well as the superintendent's objectives for the 2021-22 school year. So, can I have a motion to approve items 2A through C? Thank you. Second? Second. Thank you. Any comments or discussion? All right, hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. Just in time, Dr. Fine.
Perfect, sorry.
We're right back, yeah, no, you're good, thank you. We're into item 3A of our agenda tonight, which is our superintendent's comments around our masking policy.
Thank you very much. We appreciate everyone's patience as we continue to plan for the upcoming school year as it pertains to safety protocols surrounding COVID-19. We appreciate the community feedback that we have received in many forms over the past few weeks and understand the emotions surrounding this important decision. I'm appreciative of the board's commitment to providing the community with an opportunity to offer input and insight, as well as share our conversation around this topic in a community setting. I want to also thank Dr. Harley Williams for sharing important information to the Board of Education on this topic at last week's meeting, and he will again be sharing an update this evening pertaining to current data, quarantine guidance, and more. Board members will have an opportunity to ask Dr. Williams questions at the end of his presentation, and then I will give my recommendation for the start of the school year. Board members will be able to ask further questions, and then we will hold public participation before the board members vote on my recommendation. Dr. Williams?
Thank you, Dr. Fine, members of the board, and community members here today. I guess I don't have a clicker today, so you're my clicker?
I'm your clicker.
That's great.
On this up by the...
Well, as she's getting set up, I think it's important to begin with the charge that got us here to this presentation. Tuesday of last week we had a board meeting. Wednesday morning I met with Dr. Fine. Dr. Fine said that he wanted me to put together a presentation as much as possible in layman's terms, and I live in layman's terms, so that wouldn't be too hard. But he asked me if I could gather data and share the data with him. And he was kind enough to give me 3 days to gather all this information. So we sat down and we tried to determine what types of data would be necessary. There's so much data. I was a little overwhelmed at first, and he helped me focus on my data search and what we were looking for. And so he also asked that whatever data that I shared, that I cite the sources, and to try to keep this as brief as I can as well.
Dr. Williams, I'm sorry to interrupt you real quick. I just want to make sure the board members have it. Can you find it on your screen? Okay, I just forwarded, I tried to, I think that sometimes it's especially hard here. Is everybody have it up on there?
I'll reshare.
It just would be easier if I
Reshare. Yeah, thank you. Sorry.
That's all right.
I appreciate your patience. I know you're excited to share it.
So basically, what he asked me to do, and what hopefully you'll see in this presentation, he asked me if I could highlight and do a quick synopsis on the Delta variant. Maybe emphasize how it's different than the coronavirus or that it's Alpha variant. He asked me to identify the case rates and the hospitalizations and the death rates in Ohio and Franklin County, and if possible in Bexley. He also wanted to know what the vaccination rate in Franklin County was, and if they could get that information down to the local level in Bexley, if I could find that information as well. He also asked me to find out what other schools were doing and universities in our area. That list is changing, and I'm hoping it's as accurate as it was on Friday when we left this close of business on Friday. And finally, he asked me to update in my presentation any new information that has been received since the last board meeting last Tuesday night. So the next 15 slides that I have represents a summary of that charge. And so if you would hit the first one on the Delta variant, most people are informed on this right now, but I think the public health concerns that I could gather and cited from two sources there from the Yale Medicine and also from the CDC. I think the Delta variant is catching public health officials because it's more transmissible than the common cold and influenza and other viruses that cause smallpox, and it's as contagious as chickenpox. And what I also gathered when I was reviewing this information is that the CDC, when they released the data in July, that showed that vaccinated people could transmit Delta much more readily compared to other variants, which led the agency to reverse its masking guidelines, which I'm sure is in the news. This was the impetus for that change, is what they reported. If you hit the next slide, I think this is, I've read a lot of different things on this too, and I've seen CDC lists double. I put the more conservative number down. I've seen other reports 5 to 9 times higher transmissible, but I think the CDC projects that the Delta variant may cause at least 2 times as many infections than previous strains. So obviously that information is catching public health officials' attention as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. And as far as Ohio's new cases, and I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Tyler Trill publicly for all this. He helped put the slides together. We did research together. This is definitely, I'm up here on the podium, but it was a very collaborative work between Tyler and I do want to express my appreciation for his work as well.
Glad you're talking.
I get the job to talk, he says. So what we looked at on August 5th, when we were looking at the coronavirus website, we started from August 5th and we went back 2 weeks, and then we went back from 2 weeks ago, from July 21st to July 7th to see what changes did we see, what were the numbers. And so when we first did our first search from July 7th to July 21st, we saw that there were 7,600 new cases during that 2-week period, which led to 386 hospitalizations and reported 51 deaths. On July 22nd through August 5th, the day we were doing our search, there were 16,239 new cases reported, 648 hospitalizations, and 11 deaths. That's all in Ohio. And then we looked at it again, they looked at it through Franklin County. And on their website, the same time range, in July 7th to July 21st, there was reported 821 new cases, 26 hospitalizations, and 4 deaths. And July 22nd to August 5th in Franklin County, we had 1,733 new cases, 37 hospitalizations, and 1 death. And I think one thing, if you go back to that, Tyler, please, One of the things that surprised me when I was reviewing the data on this too were the number of deaths. I found it in the slides that how the more recent data had lower deaths but had more cases. And it caused me to look into this a little bit further and try to figure out why. Anticipate that might be a question. And so, based on some, and I can share the resources with anybody where I look, but there's a University of Nebraska study that shows that there's a lag between the surge in COVID cases and the subsequent surge in deaths range anywhere between 14 to 55 days. So after a surge, the death rate follows anywhere after 14 to 55 days, usually 2 to 8 weeks after that. And the median time lag in this study was found to be 27 days to 4 weeks. So we would expect to see a surge in deaths in a few weeks corresponding to the surge in cases, or excuse me, the surge in hospitalizations that are occurring right now. So I thought I would highlight that as we continue forward. So Tyler, if you go to the Bexley cases. When I looked at the Bexley cases, this would be strictly Bexley. As you know, in Bexley we share a 43209 zip code with I think maybe Eastmore and Berwick in those areas as well. I think so it makes it more complicated sometimes to try to look at data apples to apples. And in my conversation with Franklin County Public Health, we some things they could give me and disaggregate it just for our residents. Other things that we'll talk about later, like vaccines, they could not. And so this information right now, though, is strictly for our Bexley part of 43209. And as you can see, the last 4 weeks, this is a histogram, and that chart's so small, so I apologize to members of the audience. It starts back, the first line starts talking about cases that go back to March of 2021. And then it gives a weekly count until where we are as a week ending August 6th. And those are the numbers. So the key thing that I would highlight here is that we did have a lot of success maintaining this in our community beginning in April. April 30th, I think the date on there, we went down to 2 cases. We had a pretty good plateau, a good run. I asked a question too about the 1 week. It's 1, 2, 3, the 5th week over. Why it's going down? And the answer I got is because the week before that they counted 1 case twice, and so they made a correction. So in the week following that we had 0 cases, but because we had one that needed to be recalibrated, that made us look like we're having a negative number. And so the thing of the last week that I think is people can see on there that caught my attention was there were 16 cases, which puts us in a 1 week. I know it's just 1 week, but it does put us back to post spring break kind of number of cases we had after spring break. And then if you go to the next slide, I asked Franklin County if they could some way have their team break this information up for me by age group. Now, this information lags about 2 days apart. So those of you that are counting, you'll probably notice that, well, there's 32 cases here, I think 29 on the other, but there's this data sometimes when you're pulling it has a lag. So there's a couple day lag in here. This one goes from 7-4 to 8-4. The slide before ended on August 6th. So that explains some of the discrepancy you might see in a few cases difference. But these are the numbers that we've had in our community. This is the Bexley only at 43209. And you can see that we had 9 students out of the reported cases. And again, everything's got to be based on reported information. And that's all that we can really base our decisions on when the cases get reported. But we had 9 cases in that month between the ages of 5 and 11. 0 reported cases for 12 to 18. I think those are probably the biggest age groups that we're most interested in right now, but you can see the rest of the information there. Then we got some data late Friday night from Franklin County Public Health, and we've included it in this report as well. And this is the case rate again. This would be for the whole 43209 area, the Berwicks, maybe some of the Eastmore, that's the whole area there. As you can see, the estimated population is 28,917. We know that's much larger than what we have in Bexley. And so the case rate they had there, the aggregate case count in the 7 days prior to that update on August 6th, which had been on Friday night when I got it, I think. There was 25 cases on our whole 43209 and 7-day aggregate count. And the 2 weeks prior to that, we had 41. If you go back 2 weeks, we had 41. Or another way to look at it is we've had 25 cases last week, 16 cases 2 weeks ago. And if you look at the, also I want to point out the population. For some reason in this report they gave me a case count per 1,000, when I think the industry standard on reporting is on the 1 per 100,000. So just simple mathematics would show that the 7-day average is showing a 90 per 100,000 cases in 43209. Then the 2-week case rate would be 140 per 100,000. If you go to the vaccine numbers again here in Franklin County, we had 52. At the time when I put this slide in and the information we found, there were 52% of Franklin County is vaccinated, which is higher than Ohio's average of 47%. When you break it down by ages, there's 57% of those 18 and older, which is interesting when you look at the Bexley data. When we look at 18 and 19-year-olds, that was an interesting piece of data we got discovered as well. But 81% of those 65 and older in Ohio have shown that they've been vaccinated by the numbers there. One more slide, please. And again, I apologize, it's hard to read in the eyes, but what this slide here is, it's again, the vaccine could not be disaggregated just to our Bexley people 43209. And so they have estimated, for our zip code, they had estimated that there were about 25,000 people eligible for the vaccine, so that means 12 and older. They have and then on the charts here, and I'll read for the people in the audience that maybe can't see this, they have, I'll give it in terms of percentages, that the overall vaccine, the people in this 43209 zip code, there's been 68% of the people in this zip code who started or at least had one dose of the vaccine, and there are 64% of our total 43209 who have completed their vaccine schedule. Then when you break it down by ages, we have between the ages of 12 and 14, we have 51% of our population in 43209 that's had at least their initial or started the vaccine process. And we've had 42% of our 12 and 14-year-olds who have completed their vaccine. Then we go to the 15 to 17-year-olds. We have 61% who started it, and 56% of our 43209 15 to 17-year-olds who completed their vaccine. And as far as 18 to 20-year-olds, this was the information I spoke of earlier, that they're showing that we've only had 33% of our 43209 population who began, and there's only 30% of those few years age group in that age range who have received their vaccination rate. Next slide is hospitalization data. And I can't even read it on my paper barely with my eyes, but there are a couple things I'll point out here. One is, I think the age range that we're most interested in, and this chart was done on the 5th, August 5th is when we pulled this data, or that's when it was last updated. I think we pulled it on the 6th. It was last updated on the 5th. And if you see in the 0-17, and it says from a 1 week average, it was a change, a percentage change from 1 week ago was showing 50% increase. A change from 4 weeks ago, percentage change increased to, I want to say, is that 80%? And then a percent change from 8 weeks ago showed actually a drop. And so it asked me, maybe the question is what happens during the drop? And when I go back and you look, 8 weeks ago, that's right when the Alpha variant was starting to come into play in late May. And so from 8 weeks ago, it's showing actual a decrease in 0-17 from that age group, for that age group. Now, I do want to share this information because I just found this about 5:15 when I was closing up my computer. I had some tabs I wanted to shut down, and this tab was still up. So I just plugged in the new data, and as of today, the numbers have changed, I think, remarkably. For example, as of today in Ohio, total hospitalization, as far as from 1 week ago, where 4 days ago it was 50% increase, now it's 72% from a week ago. Then the 80% from 4 weeks ago, that's on this slide, is now 343%. And then the change for 0-17-year-olds from 8 weeks ago, it was, like I said, it was down 25%. Now it's plus 72%. And that's just in a matter of 4 days.
I'm sorry, because I can't see that on this chart. Can you shoot?
I don't. I didn't have time to update it. It was already posted. But if you're taking notes, the numbers were on 0-17. I'm sure you probably have a hard. You might be able to blow up on your screen better than I can here.
I can still.
1 week ago, we were 50% higher than we were 1 week prior. 0 and hospital admissions, percentage change for admissions.
In Ohio.
And then we were at 80%, that's on the slide up here. And then we were down 25% from 8 weeks ago. Then the new numbers for today are 72%, 343%, and 72%.
So it went up 343 and down, back down to 72 is what you're saying?
It went from being minus 25% down to a plus 72%.
I got you.
So they're all going up.
Correct. And I'll share the same information with the Central Ohio. So the next slide talks about Central Ohio. I couldn't get this information based just on Franklin County. So Franklin County is embedded within the Central Ohio region. So the map there kind of gives you an indication of what part of Ohio that this data encompasses. This is all from the Ohio Hospital Association's website. And again, if you and again, I apologize for the screen, especially members of our audience, but basically, at that time, at 0-17, talking about 0-17-year-olds, as of last Friday, our 1 week change was actually down 22.2%. Our change from 4 weeks ago for that group was up 16.7%. And as far as a change from 8 weeks ago, there was no change. It was equal. And the new information I'll share today that I just learned an hour and 15 minutes ago is that now those numbers went from minus 22.2% change is now exactly 100%. The change that was up 16.7% is now 367%. And then the change that was broke even at 0% change is now 40% as far as 8 weeks ago. I find that's interesting.
Increase in the percent of change of hospital admissions for COVID over the last time period since you broke out.
Correct. So the first column is 1 week ago, the second column would be 4 weeks ago, third column is 8 weeks ago. Percentage change and increase. And there's different age groups in there, obviously, and I didn't look at all of them. I was just focusing on the 0 to 17-year-olds. New information that we got in between meetings would be the new quarantine guidance that we got from schools. It's hard to explain, but I understand. If that makes you feel any better or not. Basically, it comes down to, well, the quarantine guidance, they've got, obviously, I'm going to show you a slide. There's some schools that have masking requirements that are optional, some schools that will have mandated masking requirements. And so, if I were, how it would work for if you would go with a masking optional position, the question for guidance would be a student, if there was a close contact in a school setting, if that student was wearing a mask, that student could continue on with school and they would just have to monitor symptoms as long as they're asymptomatic if they were wearing a mask when the contact during school when that happened. Now, how schools will determine whether somebody had their mask on all day long in school, I think that I don't know how they'll do that yet, but I'm sure there's got to be a way. And if you're vaccinated, if you're a vaccinated age group and you voluntarily disclose your card, you would not have to be quarantined. I'm giving you kind of like a summary, very quick summary. There are flow charts that go yes, no, you follow it. If you are in a mask required school, then they have another policy on top there that talks about three things. If your school is, if you go back one more slide, Tyler. Well, let's leave that up here right now. So then the other situation is if you will, mask required, then and you had a mask required, and then you had at least 3 feet of distance between the desks. And the third criteria is that you have to have documented mitigation plans. If you have those three things in place, then any exposure, close contact identified in the K-12 setting only. So in athletics, it doesn't matter, outside of the weekends, just if that contact and that exposure happened at school, and those other things were in place, then you don't have to quarantine. You would just continue to wear your mask and monitor for symptoms. And where there's confusion in the quarantine guidance, as we've been trying to sort through all this, is that the CDC's offered language around a reduced quarantine. That you now, instead of being quarantined for 14 days, you can be quarantined for 10 days and have it down to 7 if you take a PCR test or antigen test and have a negative result after day 5. Then your quarantine can end on day 7. That is the reduced. That was the reduced. Last spring they had a modified quarantine, which said that you couldn't play. You would go to school, but you couldn't do any extracurricular activities. And I hate to even bring it up because it is confusing, and people, even today on the superintendent's call we were sitting on, superintendents kept referencing that information as if it's still current. That is not current. It's only the fact that the quarantine right now, the guidelines are still 10 days, can be reduced to 7 if you pass the test after day 3. Now, if you're vaccinated, you have to wear a mask while you're indoors for at least 14 days and monitor your symptoms. If you're an athlete, our understanding right now is the only indoor sport we have is volleyball. That if you are identified as a close contact, you would have to wear a mask, and we're still waiting for guidance. So the question was asked today, would our volleyball players have to wear a mask when they're competing since they're indoors following that guidance? But as far as the other outside sports would go, you would not, it's only for indoor. It would only be for indoor. And if you can find this information readily on the internet. If you go to the next slide, here's a flow chart that I think it looks confusing, but it does guide us in the right direction for contact tracing. And we just start off with a yes or no, and based on that, we do follow that flow chart as we're making our decisions around quarantining and guidance. And I know last time we talked, we were debating whether or not we would have the authority to quarantine and isolate. And today, with the call with the Ohio Department of Health officials and Franklin County Public Health officials, they said absolutely that this would be a collaboration, and they're working on some communication on that. That I think they recognize that they don't have the capacity to do this timely and efficiently as they can with the help of the schools and our school nurses and things like that. And that's that's what we did last year. It's very similar to what we did last year. Crazy as it was, we did. That's what they did. That's what we did. Other schools, and again, we spent some time on this, and there's probably some more you can add. I heard Columbus State issued today, but the thing was out. This was already published, so we didn't add to it. Columbus State that could be added on today. Those are the schools on the left-hand side that we know that are considered mask optional. And the universal masking schools are in the middle. And then the mask required, at least in some grade levels, that's publicly announced so far, are Gahan and Worthington. And using a K-8 required, recommended for 9-12. All right, as far as local guidance, we know that on August 5th, last Thursday, there was a mask advisory for Columbus and Franklin County issued, encouraging people to wear masks when in indoor settings, in groups, and indoor settings. And at the city of Bexley on July 30th, updated guidance for masking. All individuals are recommended to wear masks when in indoor public spaces. And I think those 15 slides, I hope, at least address the questions and the data points that Dr. Fine had asked me to research. So with that, I'll close my presentation and entertain questions as best I can.
Thank you. Members of the board, any questions for Dr. Williams?
Yes, I do, if that's okay. I want to start with your slides, Dr. Williams, and I'm going to preface this with, you are the one up here asking this. I've known you for years. These questions are not aimed at you. They're aimed at the information that you've been provided.
I have a thick skin, so I appreciate that. It's nice of you to say that, but I know that.
Okay. So, you provided the information about the Delta variant. Have you been provided with, from the CDC, Franklin County Public Health, Ohio Department of Health, that the Delta variant has been found in the state of Ohio or even in central Ohio yet? Did they provide you with that data?
I did ask for that data, so I couldn't answer that question now.
On slide 3, this information from the CDC, and again, this is just questions that I'm trying to parse through. Delta variant is more contagious than previous strains. It may cause more than 2 times as many infections. Is that something, is this just a slide you pulled from the CDC? Did they have any links to any studies that they showed that it may be causing more than 2 times more infections? Or?
Yeah, there was some language in there that at one time mentioned 5 to 9% that they were citing from the internal document that was discussed in a lot of the journalistic sites and stuff like that. So I was expecting when I got on their website and looked at this that I might see that 5 to 6 range, but like I said, I think they they now staying, and this diagram shows us 2 times. So they're not taking it, the leap as I've seen other places go from 5 to 9 times greater.
But wait, I just wanted to note that I think in the previous slide, you also had linked another source. It was CDC and then another medical review from Yale. Is that right on the, sorry, I'm looking at the slide. Down at the bottom there, you see there's those two at the bottom of the
Those 2 there, as far as
CDC and Yale Medicine are the things to know about the variant.
correct. Those are the sources that
The sources, that's what I was.
those are the sources that I use and I gather my information from.
Thank you. The Franklin County new cases, and maybe I'm missing something because I printed out right before I came over to make sure I had the most up-to-date information. And this is on slide 5, where it indicates that from July 7th through August 5th, there were 5 deaths. I'm looking at page 3 of 6 on their, I think it's their epidemiology update. And it looks like from what I'm looking at, from July 2nd through at least August 4th or August 5th, I believe, maybe August 6th actually, there were 2 deaths. Is that where it says 4 deaths from July 7th through July 21st? Did that come from the Franklin County? Was that something that was on the Ohio Department of Health and maybe there's some inconsistency?
That's the link at the bottom there. And when you click on that link, sorry, it's stagnant, it's not that link. So on that link, it gives you filters, and you can sort by hospitalization data. So we filter each one of those for those dates, and those are the numbers that popped up.
The hospital, yeah, I did see the hospitalization. It was the Ohio Hospital Association. Is that where they gather their data?
On the one chart, yeah, they pull from the Ohio Hospital Association. I'm quite sure.
Okay. And the reason I asked, I'm just looking at Franklin County Public Health. It looks there's 2 deaths in the last 34 days. So, okay. On slide 6, is it that where it has the Bexley cases by week? I couldn't find this anywhere. Did you say this was somewhere on the Franklin County Public Health, or did they?
They provided that for me when I asked them for the information.
Okay. So there, according to Franklin County Public Health, there's 16 new cases in the last week. I can't read it, Emily.
Yeah, there's 16 that week, that following week.
The week from July 30th through August 6th.
Correct.
Am I reading that correctly?
Yes.
And then on slide 8, on slide 8, the 7-day aggregate. Okay, I can't figure out what I was going to ask. But I did have another question. I think it was on that slide in regard to the number of cases that we've had. It's actually slide 7, I'm sorry.
Slide 7?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So from July 4th through August 4th, according to Franklin County, this is from Franklin County Public Health, age range from 12 to 18, we've had 0 case counts, whatever that is, from reported. That's what this chart is showing.
Correct.
And then so from ages 5 through 18, in the last month we've had 9 cases.
Reported cases, yes.
And this may be a question that you can't answer because I can't figure it out. I can't find it. What do they define as cases? Do they define
I put that question out. I don't want to speculate. I mean, if you ask me to speculate, I think it's probably confirmed and suspected. But I sent an email out today to get clear definitions from them. I haven't heard back. The person I've been working with in Franklin County, I know she's been on vacation, so she's been having her team, but I haven't heard back on that question, so I can't answer that one for you definitively right now.
Yeah, and I think you're probably right, because the definitions that they provide on their charts, that Franklin County Public Health is confirmed and probable. So that's why I was wondering about, like, the 5 to 11 range in the last month, when those occurred. Were they in the last 2 weeks? Were they last week? Were they yesterday?
Those are great questions. I don't know.
They did provide, and again, you know that I'm not asking you to provide that, or that you should have. I'm just asking where that information came from. I probably will have questions later for Dr. Fine, but I just wanted to ask questions about the information that was provided on these slides. So I think that's all the questions that I had. Oh, and maybe this is just anecdotally, because you've been on the front lines of this the whole time. Last year, during our school year, understanding we were remote, hybrid, back to school, mask, how many confirmed cases of spread between students at school did we have? Was it one?
Yeah, we had a very good run at school spread. Yeah, no, I think it might have been, we had one that was possible that we couldn't actually make a direct connection to, but it could have been. I don't think we had anything other than that. I think all of our spreads were outside of school.
All right, thank you. That's all the questions I had for Dr. Williams.
Dr. Williams, I won't count down the rabbit hole on the numbers. I just want to clarify some points, because Mr. Barno did a good job of sort of highlighting some of my questions that I had. You had mentioned when you were going over the cases of death from 51 to 4 and 1 down to Bexley, and you said that there's usually a lag of like a surge of a few weeks before. So did you get any clarification if we're waiting on the surge from the last month, the holiday travel?
Yeah, I found that kind of confusing at first too, as I was looking into what basically, if I were trying to, what made sense to me when I was reading it, it's the hospitalizations that are current. There's not like an automatic schedule that someone who is going to die is going to die within so many days. And so the study that I looked at, if I can just give me 1 second to look at my notes here again.
And that study that you're looking for is just
So yes,
talking about what the pattern is.
So I think what I gathered from that, what I tried to share today is the reason for the lower numbers is that in the last 2 weeks of people hospitalization, it's a 2 to 8 week for those people that will die because of that disease. It takes 2 to 8 weeks, and so the surge today, the death rate probably not going to be the most accurate until 2 to 8 weeks. About 4 weeks is the median until those numbers become real and more definitive.
Is it possible that we could go from 0 cases to say like 30 cases, for example, and that be registered as 100% jump in increase?
Well, I think you have to, anytime you're looking at data, you have to be careful about how it's worded.
The transfer of the numbers.
Yeah, so so I would say, and to Dr. Fine's credit, is that some of the things that I was gathering first were in the forms of percentages.
Right.
And he told me to go back and get actual numbers. And so that's why I don't think you see too many times where I put percentages on there. I just want to try to get the numbers from Franklin County and said, give me the real numbers.
Who makes the trend projections when when they're looking at the fancy charts that nobody in the world can read?
What's the first part of the question?
Who makes the trend projections? Who's doing that? Franklin County Public Health.
Did we have trend projections on here?
We did. We had. Let me look at the slide. Hold on.
Nice.
And unfortunately, it's hard for me to see.
I know.
The only trend projection I think would be around the spread. We're predicting around, any positive case now might spread to 5 people, which is 2 times greater than coronavirus, each person was spreading to about 2 people, and they're predicting now that this would go double that, anywhere between 4 and, well, on the slide I showed, it said 4 to 5 people.
And that's coming from our local agency.
That came from CDC's website.
CDC, okay. And then can I just get some clarification a little bit on quarantine? You know, that was tripping me up before, so I apologize.
It is complicated.
So, we've removed, let me go back to that slide. So, CDC's recommendations on quarantine, that all of the following prevention measures have to be in place. And to my understanding,
That's Ohio Department of Health.
oh, is this oh, thank you. So, masking, physical distancing, assuming that a student has remained physically distant 3 feet the entire time of the school day. And then also documenting COVID-19 prevention policy. So that means you have it in writing, but I understand we've reduced some of our cleaning protocols, correct?
Correct.
We reduced some of the previous stuff that
We're moving into this school year, despite the decision that's made today, we're moving into flu season protocol. We used to just have a normal protocol and a flu season protocol. Last year we had normal flu and then the hazmat suit and the foggers with the COVID protocol.
So those are the protocols that we've pulled back on because those are no longer
Surface transmission is not what we thought it was going to be. So they found. So we moved back from the mitigation on that. We'll want to start with the flu season protocol.
But under number 3 there that Ms. Mitchell's talking about, so
Yeah.
that the other documented prevention policies and procedures will be in place. We will have all of those in place. The identification of individuals experiencing symptoms, the strategies to increase ventilation and
Screening. Quarantine. But that's not too hard because we did it. We've done that before.
Okay.
Now it's not like last August when we were trying to figure it all out.
Can I just ask a follow-up question on the second of those 3 bullet points? Physical distance is maximized at least 3 feet between desks. That doesn't require that everybody's 3 feet apart every minute of the day.
That's a good catch, and I read that too, and I went, thank you, because with the original guidance we had to do 3 feet, and if you work with kids, it's hard, and I think it's impossible. And so I like the way they worded it now. It's at 3 feet between desks, and I think there's an understanding that middle schoolers have to touch one another sometimes, and it's just part of who they are. They just bump into someone or whatever. So it's not like it can never be that way, but we're making, and we lived in that 3-foot world since we came back from spring break last year, March 23rd. We went to 3 feet distance, and we still had a very successful campaign. And I'll point out again that our in June 10th, the last cash report, we had the lowest case rate between all Franklin County schools. So the mitigation plan that we put in place last year, it worked. And in comparison, at least with other districts that had the same, a lot of the variables were the same. We were pretty proud of our efforts that we had the lowest case rate per 100,000 of all other Franklin County schools.
So to clarify that particular point, the only variable that we had that was different was that when we returned back to school, we had a double mask mandate.
Correct.
But all the other schools
No.
were at least 3 feet masking or no?
I can't speak to what every school did. I can't, every school made their own decision about when they wanted to come back, if they wanted to come back. And so some schools, I remember, I think we talked at the board, at St. Charles, for example, they came back a lot earlier than we did. New Albany came back maybe earlier than we did, but their all-in was different because of the number of kids they had on remote learning. St. Charles has all this space they could bring back in at 6 feet, whereas Hartley could not make the 6 feet distance, so they went to hybrid. Well, St. Charles was all in, so it was kind of a case by case basis. Every school had to make their own decision around spacing and masking requirements to see what they could do safely.
So in fact, on the surface, we all didn't have the same situation. Everybody was pretty much
Yeah,
there.
one of the variables that were different would be space.
It's a huge variable.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even include we could do a causal study between them. Everybody had to make their own decision, but we had the same issues around spacing, distancing, and masking is what I was trying to refer to there to address.
And I think the last question that I had just briefly, so looking at the other school requirements for mask optional and universal masking, two of the local secondary schools and then one of the post-secondary schools are two of the districts with some of the largest population, and their classroom size is pretty large, so I could understand
The Columbus Diocese has made it mask optional for all the schools.
for the Catholic schools and
For
stuff.
all Catholic schools in Central Ohio, that diocese, it's all mask optional. I was checking with St. Charles and
This
St.
is
Catherine's.
great, actually. This was the question that we were
Okay. I don't think it's-
last year, so this slide is actually fantastic.
I just don't think it's fair for us to speak to where they landed, why they landed. Yeah, that's the.
I'm not asking for that. That's not what I'm asking for. I'm just simply, when we're making a statement about, well, they were able to do
They're our
this,
neighbors.
then we're implying that very thing, Dr. Fine. That we're making a justification for why a district did what they did. So I think that's all I have for right now.
I go back, sorry, I want to answer John's question about the Delta variant in Ohio, John. I've seen the information, but I was only able to pull it up just now. This is old data. This is from the governor's office, the governor's website. The Delta variant is now the dominant strain of COVID-19 in Ohio. In May, it was less than 1% of lab sequence cases that were identified as the Delta variant. The most recent data, again, this is an older version. The most recent, according to this website, is July 4th through July 17th, showed that 86.4% of lab sequence cases with the Delta variant in Ohio. I don't have in front of me information in Central Ohio, Franklin County.
What was that number? I'm sorry.
Yes, in May, less than 1% of lab sequence cases were identified as the Delta variant. In July 4th through July 17th data, it showed that 86.4% of lab sequence cases were the Delta variant. And I'm not going to make a guess as to what it is now.
So 86.4 in that 2-week period. Is that what you said?
Yeah, from May
I got the May.
to July 4th through the 17th.
The 86.4 has been basically found as Delta.
Yeah.
I have that. It's on government.
Okay.
Any further questions for Dr. Williams?
Can I ask one quick one? Can you go back to that slide of the school comparison slide that you just on? Yeah. Other than Columbus School for Girls in Hamilton, do we know if any other districts have like an all, like, one campus kind of set up like we do? I mean, you know what I mean? Does anybody have any like anecdotal knowledge?
I'm saying Central Ohio, you might find that more outside. But even those outlying schools now with the building, state funding they're getting, they're building these wonderful schools that are usually all separate, but they're on the same kind of a campus. We are kind of unique. I know, Grandview has their own separate buildings now too. That new building, right? I can't think of anyone else like us that has 3 schools in one building in Central Ohio.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Dr. Williams? A huge thank you very much, and
Thank you.
appreciate the work. Before I make my recommendation, I think I want to take a second, is it okay, to welcome Gwen Hall.
Thank you.
Quinn Hall is in the house. That's exciting. Quinn Hall is our student representative. I believe you're a senior, Quinn.
I'm a senior, yes.
Well, we appreciate you being here. Quinn, I think, is a soccer player.
Yeah, that's why I was late.
Yeah, that's all right. That's why I'm giving you the out. So we appreciate you being here. I love that you're part of this, and we love that you're involved in a lot of activities, and we want you to join you when it works for you. So thank you. Welcome.
Glad to be here.
Bexley City Schools looks forward to welcoming back all of our students for in-person learning on Thursday, August 19th. It is hard to believe that in just 10 days, our buildings will be filled with our amazing staff and our students to begin another school year. We are so excited to be back to a traditional 5-day-a-week, all-in setting, and we plan to do so for the entire school year. It is critical for our students to be in an academic setting for their learning, social needs, and emotional well-being. We want to ensure that we are able to avoid interruption in learning and minimize the need to quarantine students. The COVID Delta variant is now the most prevalent strain of COVID-19 in Ohio and across the country. Data reviewed by the district continues to reveal this particular variant is highly contagious and can still be transmitted to vaccinated individuals. We recognize there are many perspectives on issues pertaining to COVID-19 and how to operate in this stage of the pandemic. The Center for Disease Control recommends universal indoor masking for all teachers, staff, students, and visitors to K-12 schools, regardless of vaccination status. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends universal indoor masking for all children older than 2 and for school staff in schools unless a medical or developmental condition prohibits its use. The Ohio Department of Health and the Ohio Department of Education recommend students and school staff who are unvaccinated to wear masks when indoors or in a crowded setting where distancing cannot be maintained. Franklin County Public Health strongly recommends schools to follow CDC guidance and adopt universal masking policies for all students, teachers, and staff regardless of their vaccination status. Columbus Public Health and Franklin County Public Health issued an indoor mask advisory on Thursday, August 5th. Additionally, the City of Bexley updated its guidance to recommend that all individuals wear masks when indoor public spaces on July 30th. Ensuring students are able to attend school in person is the priority of the district. We know wearing masks has proven to slow the spread of COVID. Wearing masks is also a key preventative measure in reducing the spread of illness and avoiding quarantining students throughout the school year. In the recently released Ohio Department of Health quarantine guidance for schools, wearing a mask, along with physical distancing and other COVID-19 prevention policies, allows students, regardless of vaccination status, to avoid quarantine. Consistent mask requirements at all grade levels also reduces the risk of social stigma associated with students making mask-wearing decisions. Given all of this, I am recommending to the Bexley City School Board of Education to require all students, staff, and essential visitors, regardless of vaccination status, to wear masks while inside our facilities during school hours, effective immediately. Therefore, I recommend the resolution before you for your vote. In addition, after the Board of Education makes a decision on masking, we will go back as a leadership team and work to operationalize the full mitigation details in accordance with Ohio High School Athletics Association and other industry standard guidelines to fully prepare for the start of the school year. I'm happy to answer any questions from the board members at this time before we have public participation.
We'll also have an opportunity to discuss this again after public comment, so we can,
Yeah,
whatever.
I mean, should we ask Dr. Fine questions now, or?
Sure, about his presentation.
Yes, sir. Okay. So Dr. Fine, one of the questions that I am curious about is there a specific data point that you are using to recommend universally masking our students? Is there a specific data point that you're saying that you're using to make this recommendation?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. So I will start by saying There's been a lot of conversations. I've done a lot of research. I've had a lot of conversations with our departments of health, done my own research. I want to start by saying that I've taken a lot of that insight and taken guidance from recommendations from those types of organizations. I also want to acknowledge the Delta variant. I do not have the data right now that you would ask for. I do know that it is prevalent in Ohio. I am concerned with what we're learning about the Delta variant and that it is at a minimum what we're learning. Research suggests that it's 2 times more likely to be contagious than what we are used to. I would say that Franklin County is considered a substantial risk in terms of infections. And I believe slide 6 that Dr. Williams shared, when we see the 16 cases in the week of August, I believe August 6th, I think that's a concerning piece. I know it's one data point, and that is why I will not speak to one data point that's led me to this decision, but it's an important data point. I know that that is a number that is similar to numbers you saw in March and April in Bexley. The concerning piece of that is that likely involves the Delta variant, which tells me it's going to be more infectious. And by making this recommendation, the goal is to eliminate disruption to learning and keeping kids in school protected from those quarantines that we discussed.
So, thank you for that.
Yeah.
And I asked Dr. Williams this question. Has Franklin County or anybody else defined cases for you? Is that confirmed, probable? Because Franklin County defines it as confirmed or probable. So when they list 16, do you know how many are confirmed or how many probable?
I don't. I know Dr. Williams looked into that a little bit today. I also don't know. We speak to reported cases, so that's it.
Totally get it.
Yeah. Yep.
And just because you mentioned it, the Delta variant, I actually pulled up the study that the CDC cites to. And it is based upon a study that was done on June 1st of 2021. It looks like it was called the Interim Estimates of Increased Transmissibility, Growth Rate, and Reproduction of the COVID-19 B1.1 variant concern in the United Kingdom. This article is a preprint, has not been peer-reviewed. It reports new medical research that is yet to be evaluated, so should not be used to guide clinical practice. That's at the top of the study that the CDC is recommending, and you weren't here in February when we had these discussions about the CDC recommendation and the double masking with the mannequins,
Right.
how that's not peer-reviewed. So what I'm asking, and the reason I point this out is, this Delta variant, and why I asked when it says may, and then maybe that's the lawyer in me, when it says may be increased transmissibility, that's based upon what this, and I understand you're getting the data from all these sources. The CDC recommends mask wearing K-12 based upon this transmissibility of the Delta variant. But the WHO doesn't recommend masking for kids 11 or under. And that's it's kind of the same thing. And again, you know that I'm not asking you these questions because I expect you to know the answer to them. Your research into this, what was the discrepancy between the CDC and the WHO?
I will tell you that I have had hours of conversations with area superintendents, with our local departments of health, and the recommendations that I have really been a part of those conversations in person and in literature did not involve me having conversations with WHO.
And that kind of goes to another question about the superintendents. It appears, at least, I'm kind of printing off my own thing, but I appreciate that slide. The majority, at least twice as many, and especially some of the bigger districts, especially districts like Pickerington, and I believe Hilliard did something today. I don't know exactly what.
I think they're in a conversation right now.
Okay. So let me pull up that slide.
Yeah, I think it's.
It's the second to last one.
Canal, Winchester, Dublin, Grove, Minutes, and Alton. even St. Catherine's and St. Charles here in the 43209, even Ohio Dominican University, which, I mean, I'm not going to compare us to a university that's a completely different animal, because Capital and Ohio State, but even Ohio Dominican University doing masks, optional recommended. What are the discussions that you have had with superintendents in these districts, if you've had any, and why they decided mask optional? Because I'm assuming they have the same data and information that you do.
Yeah. So that's what I think I was trying to get at earlier when I said it would be really challenging for me to speak to those districts. We've had lots of great conversations, a lot of it being frustrations in terms of I was hired to be the educational leader of this district and to lead our students and to ensure the safety of our students and our amazing staff. And I feel like in other areas, superintendents feel that we've been asked to be health officials. So there's a frustration around them. We don't get into conversations about why are you making one decision, why are you not making one decision. Every community is different. Every community is built differently. And we zeroed in on trying to get answers from our health department versus trying to figure out why are you in Canal Winchester making a decision that is different than why I'm making a decision.
And so, and maybe I'm trying to convince you to change your recommendation, but when you talked about the Delta variant, that was good information to have, that between July 4th and July 17th, 86.4% of the cases that were diagnosed were of the Delta variant. But I was looking at the numbers, at least from the Ohio Department of Health, since that came from the Wise office, the numbers were probably close to their lowest during that period of time. And I think even Dr. Williams mentioned expectations about, expectations. We've heard this from our own watch team. Well, we expect an increase after spring break. We expect an increase, and it never accumulated or materialized, I should say. So I guess the question is the discussions, and I'm not saying why did we do this, but the discussions with other superintendents that have made this recommendation for mask optional. Those are discussions about the Delta variant, or were they talking about every
recent? Yes, I would say every time I've been on one of those calls, and it's weekly, we have conversations about the impact of the current state of affairs, and Delta is a part of that conversation.
I know these are maybe getting into the weeds questions, but athletics, theater, choir, clubs, all of that stuff. It sounds like your recommendation is that inside during school hours. Is that how it would?
Yeah, great clarifying question. This recommendation is during school hours. We will follow guidance from our Ohio High School Athletic Association, who follows the Ohio Department of Health guidance, where that would be mask strongly encouraged after hours. We will take and operationalize all aspects to materialize that into decisions based off of using industry standard guidelines in the other areas. But yes, this recommendation is during school hours indoors.
Now, are there going to, and again, I'm not trying to get into the weeds too much, is that our policy permits you to, if whatever we decide here tonight, we put in place the protocols. But before I vote on something, I'd like to know maybe how it might look like. I'm not asking you to tell me everything. But are exceptions to mandatory masking and what those might look like? For instance, health reasons. I don't know what any other reasons. Have you thought about those at all?
I want to make sure I understand.
For instance, if a parent has a doctor's Tuesday,
yes.
Like,
so we have a form that we will make sure is visible on the website. That is the term slipped me, but a waiver, a process for us to fill out and have that conversation. And we've actually had those scenarios a year ago. We want to work with our families and make sure that students have what they need, but there'll be a quick process that the family fills out, and we'll go that route. Dr. Williams has updated that form, I believe, in the last couple of days.
Is there any data point or data points that you would have if your recommendation is approved this evening that you would look at to say, come back to us and say, I'm going to rescind the mask mandate recommendation? Is there any specific data point that you're
Like an off-ramp?
Yeah, that's a good word.
So it's a great question, and it's something we've processed through out this conversation, and I've asked that question to a lot of those folks that I've sat on those superintendency calls with the health officials. it's my understanding, Harlan Williams is the legend and can speak to this much better, but it's my understanding that CDC recommends that off-ramp being at 50,000 or 50 per 100,000. I think I heard Dr. Williams say that based on slide 5 or one of those, that we were at between 90 per 100,000 and 140 per 100,000.
Which slide was that?
I believe
It was the Franklin County data.
right here. So Harley did some good math for us because in the slide they were giving us per 1,000. But that is what I would sit here today, John, and say is I don't want to be in masks. I've got a freshman and a senior who I vaccinated so they wouldn't have to be in masks. Things have changed to where I think it's necessary that in order to be safe, that masking is necessary, but I want to know what that off-ramp is as well. And I think it'd be foolish for me right here to say I think the off-ramp should be X number, an arbitrary number, without having a conversation with the board, with our health experts, to make sure we get to that off-ramp and we communicate that.
And I guess that what you said kind of is where I'm at with this, trying to figure out. So, like on slide 8, this data, there's 4, 3, 2, and 9, and then there's
Right.
Bexley case
Yes.
count. For instance, this is just, well, it's not a rhetorical question, it's an actual question. We have 0 cases for 12 to 18. Why wouldn't we do what Gahanna and Worthington does, K through 12? Especially since every kid in K through 12 has had the opportunity to be vaccinated.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I love that question because it's an important conversation that I've had with a lot of people and internally. I'm going to go back to a couple of talking points and I'm going to add a new piece. And the first talking point is that Delta variant is concerning, that it is more contagious. And I'm also concerned about some of the new breakthrough cases that we're hearing about and learning about. And those breakthrough cases are occurring in people who are vaccinated and unvaccinated. Knowing that tells me that there could be an increase in cases, whether you are vaccinated or unvaccinated. And if we gave the option for students and families to make that decision at a, let's say, 9-12 level or a 7-12 level, I've been walking the streets. You've been walking the streets. I don't think I've seen 50% of our community members, our students, wearing masks. I'm not saying they wouldn't. I'm not saying they wouldn't do that. But knowing that every time a student is unmasked in this district and they are a close contact, if they are unvaccinated, they are now out of school. And I've met with, I'd say, over 100 community members to learn this job. And all of them have told me how important it is for kids to have a consistent experience in school. So I believe through that process, the best way to provide an experience that is consistent and in school is through the masking, because of our inability to enforce whether you were vaccinated or not vaccinated. The last piece I would say, this, I will tell you, I've wrestled with this quite a bit, and I will tell you I was probably leaning more towards K-8. I want to tell you about an experience I had at one of my meet and greets where I put a mask on and I had a community member come up, point at me, and laugh at me for wearing a mask. I'm 46 years old and I can handle that, but I don't know how our 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old students can handle the stigma of being asked or attacked why they're wearing a mask or why they're not wearing a mask. And so that was a really important piece for me, because that's what, if I go optional K-12 or optional 7-12 or optional 9-12, I fear about putting our students into a position where they have to defend a stance, especially when all we keep talking about in this district is the social and emotional well-being of our students.
I was going to ask a very similar question, the question that John just asked, but I just want to clarify, make sure
I couldn't hear you.
make sure that it's clear. I think, John, you might have said, why go K-12? K-12 is has had the opportunity to
He
vaccinate.
said K-8.
I'm sorry, then 9/12.
I'm just clarifying
Yeah.
what you meant.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I
Yeah,
thought
I
you
meant
meant
9/12, and even 6/12,
Seven.
yeah.
Right.
Okay, you're right. So, that actually leads me to my next question well, actually, I have another question
Yeah.
to decide. One of the data points you said was the 16 cases.
Yep.
I get that. So, if next week we're at 2 cases, and the next week is we're at 1 case, and we're 1 week into school, and that trend continues, because it's only, that could be 1 day
Right.
spike, and it's a 1 data point. Is that how?
The great-
This is a very difficult question,
Yeah,
Andy.
but it's a great
Like, where
question.
do you weigh that, the number of cases at that 16,
Yeah.
it drops way down?
I want to go back to, I love the question, and the answer goes back to kind of what we talked about that offering. I certainly don't think it's appropriate for me to tell you what I will do if X happens in
Right.
1 week, 2 weeks. But I also want to make sure that as you ask that question, what was the data point? It was a lot of conversations, a lot of research, a lot of data. I pointed you to one data point that happened to be on the slide today. It is part of the puzzle that I want what we want, which is to get kids unmasked. So I am interested in being at the table with the Board of Education and area health officials to determine what that number is and how long do we need to maintain that to show it's safe to make a different decision. And
That makes sense. So when you talk about the social emotional issues, there are articles, maybe some studies, but are there studies, or is this part of your data points, the effects, the negative effects of masking children, especially younger and junior high and middle school level kids? And is there data out there on that about, especially somebody that's starting kindergarten, their first day of kindergarten, that they have to see their teacher and they're in a mask? Especially, I'm not an educator or psychologist or anything, but from what I've read, there's a lot of language skills, just picking up facial expressions, that socializing, and that especially takes place in kindergarten.
you are absolutely correct. And I'm not going to sit here and say one stigma trumps another stigma. It's all very concerning. We are aware of the data that's out there. We are well aware. I've got a freshman that is joining this community, and I think that will impact how she is welcomed, how she is perceived. I worry about all of those things. Our kindergartners especially. That's why I think we got to look at ourselves, our processes. What can we provide to our kindergarten teachers, our teachers? Clear masks, whatever that looks like, so that we can support those students, and making sure that when they are outdoors, trying to maximize opportunity there. But yes, I agree with you. I've seen that information, and it concerns me as well.
And I'm not really advocating for this, and this is again before your time. The issue with the double mask, we said believe our watch team had recommended. If we're going to go all in, we need to do double mask, and that was a big discussion back in February. What's the change with that, and is that something? And again, I'm not advocating.
No, it's a great question. So you're right. I wasn't here a year ago. I know we've learned a lot in a year. Double masking has not been anything that I have seen or read in terms of the recommendations and my conversations with the local health officials that has told me that we must double mask. I was in a district a year ago that did not double mask. I know that is a real, that was close to this community, but I feel we've learned more since a year ago. I supported this district double mask. It showed great results. But that is why my recommendation is not to double mask this year.
And I just have one more question. I'm sorry.
No, please.
This is an important decision for all of us. So I get what you talked about, and I appreciate looking at all these different data points and recommendations, and I know that you spent a lot of time on this, as I think all of us, because we want to get this right for our kids. What information did you look at, if any, that, and I understand all the data points and case counts and all of that, anybody can look at all of those numbers, but specific studies that masking students in school prevents the transmission of COVID, the Delta variant.
Yeah.
Because from what I read, and some of these studies haven't been peer reviewed either, so I don't want to have a double standard here. But when you you have control group versus masking, mandated mask versus unmasked.
Yeah.
The transmission and the case counts and whatever definitions you use are not terribly different. And certainly when we're talking about mandating everybody to wear a mask. So I don't know if you had a chance or if you discussed that with CDC or with the.
That's my response is, I didn't cut you off. Go ahead.
No, I think you.
The response is, through those conversations, I don't know if I can point you to one exact piece of data. I've seen both sides of the argument. We have, as recently as 3:30 p.m. today, been given really strong recommendations from those health organizations that universal masking isn't recommended.
Dr. Fine, it's the same thing I said to Dr. Williams. I'm asking you these questions because they're important questions that I would like answered, and I know that you can't have all the data points, and I understand all of that. So I appreciate your time in answering these questions.
John, I appreciate it, and I think it's helpful to have these conversations, especially in this type of setting, so thank you.
Just really quickly, I jumped in there, I'm sorry. Because I asked questions last time. Go ahead. You guys don't have any questions.
Well, I can go right ahead.
Okay.
On record, yeah.
So, Dr. Fine, I am a little troubled that we're basing data-informed decisions on cases that could include confirmed and probable. So I just think from an effort of making sure our community fully understands the decisions that we're making, and we're going to put out there that we're making database decisions, the data needs to be confirmed. We need to know where we're pulling it from and how we're supporting those decisions. I am curious, who's going to determine the waiver process that is going to go potentially on the website?
Yeah, I assume you had a process a year ago. We will materialize the process. It is a process that I lived a year ago in a different district.
Can you talk me through what that looked like?
We had someone at central office. When a family reached out, you have to have a doctor's note. You have to have the explanation how it impacts that individual child, signed by a physician. We provide that to our district, whoever that would be. Perhaps that's Dr. Williams. He reviews it, connects with me. We then have a conversation with the family. If all the things are in place, it's an approval, and you move forward and make sure. The key is making sure that you provide additional mitigation strategies for that child, and make sure that the teachers, the staff members coming into contact with that student are in the loop, so that they're there to support that process.
So just a quick, rough math. I don't claim to be a scientist or a mathematician, but we have 0.00375 cases, according to the data that you submitted to us today, of active cases or could be probable at this point, right? It could be confirmed, could be probable. I think that's confirmed cases. That's reported. So we're making decisions on not only what's reported, but what might not be reported.
We're making decisions on all of those things that I mentioned earlier.
I'm not talking about anecdotal, I'm talking about the actual number. We're basing that on those 9 cases are actual cases, right?
And local is important, but I'm also very interested in what's happening at the county level, the state level, and beyond.
Absolutely. I think we looked at all of those sources last year. I think my greatest frustration as an elected official is that the agencies that we rely on to step into the space and lead have basically punted the ball and asked leaders in respective school districts to step into spaces and do the job that they should be doing, and they want to hold authority over school districts with recommendations, which by the way are not requirements, and refuse to lead. So that is extremely frustrating to me, that we're asked to amass this huge amount of data and then try to figure out cases versus percentage, delta versus omega. I mean, it's really it's unfortunate and speaks loudly to these agencies who were not ready for a situation like this, but they're lauded as the experts in the field. So,
Well said.
again, my questions are not a reflection of what I think you did or did not do. I tried to make sure I told that to Dr. Williams. He kind of knows my personality though. It's not a reflection of the administrative staff or anything like that. It's just really, really troubling for me to look at the actual number and get to the same position that you are in, and then to not, that's our on-ramp, but we don't have an off-ramp. So maybe we should be proactively also considering that too.
I appreciate that. And I think last year this group talked really heavily about that off-ramping piece. And I think you learned a year ago that what you started out as with an off-ramp would have never gotten you off the ramp. So that's why I want to make sure.
Yeah, and I would think this 150 to 100,000 is also not a realistic number.
So that's why we want to have that conversation.
Yeah.
But thank you. Other questions?
So my questions that I didn't have already answered before were asked by Don, so I got my answers. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, so, thank you. Dr. Fine, you pretty much answered my question, which was about the the medical exemptions or how, what the, like, who, because universal masking, I think, sounds universal, but actually there are opportunities to discuss with your physician and consider each student's individual medical, I mean, it's not, in fact, there is the opportunity to apply for exemption, a medical exemption, I think is important. So you answered that, and I really appreciate the, what you said, prioritize in-person consistent learning. I think that's what I'm big on consistency, so thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Any other questions for Dr. Fine? All right, so at this point, I think it would be helpful if Mr. Trill, if you could put the proposed resolution on the screen for our audience members, and I'm going to read it into the record. I appreciate all of your patience, and I will do my best to speak clearly for those of you who are not with us tonight. Whereas, given the extraordinary circumstances of COVID-19, the Board of Education of the Bexley City School District, Franklin County, Ohio, sets district priorities: the health, physical, mental, and safety of our students and staff, and the academic success of our students through increased contact time and consistency between teachers and students to the maximum extent safely possible in the current circumstances. Whereas the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and the Franklin County Public Health and Public Health Departments have recommended universal indoor masking for all teachers, staff, students, and visitors to the school, regardless of vaccination status. Whereas the CDC has ordered that passengers and drivers must wear a mask while on school buses, subject to exclusion and exemption of its January 29, 2001 order. Whereas the Ohio Department of Health strongly recommends those who are unvaccinated wear masks while in school. Whereas wearing a mask has been proven to prevent the spread of respiratory droplets that are breathing when people talk, laugh, sing, cough, and sneeze. And researchers have found that wearing masks and mindful distancing was effective in slowing the spread of COVID-19 in schools. Whereas the highly transmittable Delta variant has become dominant in Ohio and presents an increased risk of severe illness or death to those who are unvaccinated. Whereas vaccination is the leading public health strategy to end the COVID-19 pandemic, and eligibility is currently limited to individuals 12 years and older. Whereas ensuring students have access to in-person learning is a key priority of the board, and masks are an important prevention strategy to reduce the spread of illness to help limit the instances of isolation and quarantine. Whereas the Ohio Revised Code, Section 33133.67, authorizes boards of education to make and enforce such rules to prevent the spread of communicable diseases among the students attending or eligible to attend the schools in the district, as in its opinion, the safety and interest of the public require. Bexley City School District, the Board of Education will require 1, universal indoor masking for all teachers, staff, students, and visitors to the schools regardless of vaccination status, other than those who may be exempted by district administration for CDC guidelines. 2, passengers and drivers and all school transportation should wear masks when required as by applicable laws and regulations. 3, all extracurricular activities will be held in accordance with OHSAA and others industry standard guidelines as determined by the superintendent. Be it further resolved that the superintendent is authorized to adopt procedures to implement this resolution, directed to monitor current guidance, recommendations, and requirements for the public health authorities, and directed to make recommendations to adjust mask requirements as necessary. This resolution is temporary in nature and subject to periodic review by the board as circumstances change. So that is the content in its entirety of the proposed resolution from our superintendent this evening. Given that, I'd like to. I'm sorry.
I thought you were about to call for a motion.
No. I'm sticking with the agenda. On our agenda, we will, now that we've had an opportunity to hear the resolution, we are going to move on to our public participation section. I will just note that if you haven't had the opportunity to sign in, if you do so, I would appreciate that. We're working to streamline our process a little bit on that so people are aware. Obviously, things have changed from when we did it on Zoom, and we had people able to sign up online. So as you come in, I think maybe next month we should say for public comment, please sign up to voting before the meeting. We're just always improving our process. Lots of iterations. Thank you. Okay. So now that people have had the opportunity to sign up, so I will begin by saying that although under state law, the Board of Education is not required to offer public comment time during regular board meetings, we do welcome the opportunity to hear from our members. As such, we encourage your participation within certain parameters. Prior to the start of the meeting, we ask that you sign in on the public comment sheet at the podium. When you come to the microphone, please state your name and your address. Please limit your comments to 5 minutes per board policy. Finally, we note that public comment is just that. It's the public's opportunity to be heard. It's not a question and answer session with the board or our administrators. We look forward to hearing your comments, but per board policy, we will not respond to public comment in the meeting or as individual board members. You can be assured, however, that we are actively listening and taking notes for future reference and review. I will also note that according to board policy, the president may end public commentary if standards of appropriateness, respect, and professionalism are not followed. I appreciate everyone's civility, order, and good manners, and seek to engage in sound and enlightened public discourse. Given that, if you can start us off, Mr. Smith, with our public comment individuals.
We have 7 total. Joseph Winchell, I believe.
Hello, I'm Joseph Winchell. My address is 74 South Roosevelt. I'm a lifelong Bexley resident, graduated class 93. I'm a family medicine physician. I was a grad student for 20 years. I care for adults and children. Should be said I have 2 children at Bexley. One is about to be a senior, Aaron, and my son Sean is actually at Franklin County DD School, on West Central School. In the last year and a half or so, I've cared for dozens of COVID patients, some of which have died. I do truly understand the seriousness of this illness. A few things should be said. In regards to public health, the goal is to mitigate death and decrease the burden on our hospital system, and we've done that to some degree. While we do want to reduce spread for those reasons, reducing spread in and of itself is not the overlying goal. What we know, kids do not get very ill with COVID on any regular basis. Nationwide, there's been 349 deaths due to COVID that come from the CDC's website. Central Ohio Nationwide Children's Hospital has had 781 hospitalizations for COVID in the last year and a half. This is as of data they posted July 24th. They've had, as far as I know, 0 deaths. I know in the state of Ohio there's been 7 COVID deaths, ages 0 to 19. Back to the percentages of hospitalization. Basically, doing the math, there's been on average 1.6 or so hospitalizations at Nationwide Children's Hospital per day over the pandemic. We know that the vaccine is very effective and widely available. Right now, children ages 12 and up can have the vaccine, and fairly soon we'll have 2 to 11 also be eligible for the vaccine. Almost all the hospitalizations and deaths are due to unvaccinated adults. Even Dr. Fauci was quoted this week or last week saying you have a 0.01% chance of vaccinated people being hospitalized, by lowering that to death. We have in this country a choice for our healthcare. If you come into my office, you tell me I'm having a heart attack, doc, or my chest hurts, and I'm smoked, and I have high blood pressure, and I suggest empathic care, you have every right to decide we do not want that care. At this point, with the widely available vaccine, adults have made that choice. Those that want the vaccine have gotten it. Those that are hesitant have not. So our goal should not be to try to protect those people. They've made a choice. In the general public, we are not widely wearing masks. I've been to sporting events, dinner at the top, church, concerts, and I would argue that less than 10% of people are masking. Even at this meeting last week, as Dr. Dara pointed out, 1 person out of the group was wearing a mask. So, my question is this: if kids are low risk, if the vaccine is widely available and effective, and if the general public does not want to wear masks despite CDC recommendations and all the information that was posted tonight, why are we trying to pass a mandate that is ineffective and possibly harmful for our children in regards to their social and educational development? I do ask the board to vote against this mandatory masking and let the parents decide what is right for our children. Thank you.
I'll apologize on the last name. Dr. Caitlin Lithalian?
Italian, thank you.
Italian.
Good evening, and thank you for allowing us to speak for this extremely vitally important measure. So, my name is Dr. Caitlin Italian. I am a resident of 61 South Remington Road, and I'm a pediatric cardiologist at Nationwide Children's Hospital. While there are other medical professionals in this room, I can speak with assuredly that I am probably the only person that has actually taken care of patients suffering from the cardiac complications of COVID-19 as pediatric patients. For the last 17 months, that has been my daily life. And I am here to implore our school board to do the most responsible thing for our children, which is a universal mask mandate for all students K through 12. For me, this is more than internet research and sound bites. It can be distilled down to data points that lag behind what those of us on the front lines have known from the beginning, okay? There's a fixation here on hospitalizations and death in children. And as one of the 7 cardiologists at Nationwide Children's that has taken care of patients with post-COVID symptoms, lingering for months, without a diagnosis, no myocarditis, but unable to keep up with their sports scenes, I will not put my children in any position that would allow them to possibly contract COVID-19. I did forget to mention, I'm the mom of a rising kindergartner and a rising 3rd grader. I know firsthand how this year has disrupted our youngest children and students. And the path that gets us to an uninterrupted hopefully uninterrupted year is universal mask mandates. Without this, we are at risk of quarantines and interruptions, which are devastating for the psychological and mental well-being of our children. With this, I know Dr. Fine mentioned the American Academy of Pediatrics recommendations, but I felt that their recommendations were a little bit absent in some of the presentations that were shared with you guys today. So to make sure that the recommendation from our foremost group of pediatricians in this country, I wanted to repeat this for everyone. The American Academy of Pediatrics strongly recommends inpatient learning and urges all who are eligible to be vaccinated to be protected against COVID-19. In addition to vaccinations, the AAP recommends a layered approach to make schools safe for all students, teachers, and staff. That includes a recommendation that everyone older than age 2 wear masks, regardless of vaccination status. The AAP also amplifies the CDC's recommendation for building ventilation testing, parting, cleaning, and disinfecting in the updated guidance. So, there's, in my opinion, and in the AAP's opinion, but one recommendation to keep our kids safe, and that is to vote for universal masking for all of our students. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. If you all, sorry to my phone out, but I'm using it as a timer because I'm trying to be consistent with our board policy. And in so doing, I also have noted that our board policy allows for 30 minutes of public comment. If we are to have 5 minutes from each of the 7 people, that would go over that. So at this point, I'd like to have a motion. I would like to entertain a motion from the board member to allow our public comment to go beyond 30 minutes to 35 minutes this evening, so that we can hire from everybody who signed up. So thank you. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposing sign? Thank you. That motion carries. I appreciate you all allowing for that. And then Mr. Smith, if you wouldn't mind calling our next individual.
Ray Lukart.
Hi, my name is Ray Lukart, 311 Westland Avenue. I'm a parent of 2 middle schoolers, 14-year-old and 12-year-old. I'm here and present on behalf of a large group of parents who desire medical freedom from their families and children. During this meeting, I urge you to consider medical freedom for the parents and children of Bexley City Schools. Masks are medical devices. Mandating a medical device is a violation of one's medical freedom. Children cannot give consent for this device. That is a fact. There is no law in place for you to force your hand to swing one way or the other with the mask language you are going to use in your communication. The recommendations you heard in the past are only that. They are not law. Masking children is extremely controversial and will continue to remain controversial. Therefore, the decision is best left up to the parent and child unit. Masks are medical devices that also carry a burden of risk. Are you willing to accept that risk? Are you willing to accept bacterial transfer on children's faces? Are you willing to accept mental health complications as for being forced to wear a device on your face? Are you going to carry that burden? This is about autonomy. We, the parents, retain autonomy over our children. You are entrusted to provide public education to them, nothing more. If they quarantine, that is my problem. That is not your problem. And I will accept that risk. You cannot give them a Tylenol without our permission. A surgeon cannot remove a child's appendix without informed consent. of the parent. The decision to muzzle their faces for 8 hours a day is not yours to make. We do not consent. Forcing a medical device onto a child or any medical intervention is assault. Please do not interject your own personal opinions or the opinions of the biased, unelected medical advisory team to make decisions for our children. COVID is not going away. It's never going away. No matter if we mask, no matter if we vaccinate, it will mutate, it will continue on and on and on. In 5 years from now, when your kindergartner went to school wearing a mask, will they still be wearing a mask in 5th grade? Ask yourself, do you want that for your child? By the way, I see it tonight. I have a feeling you are being pushed in a certain direction. All wearing masks tonight with almost no community spread at the current time. You are being pushed, and I feel that you are being pushed. Also, your recommendation to universal masking, please provide transparency for the parents who wish to opt out. In the same communication to the community, please do not discriminate the children that are burdened by masking. Please do not require a physician's signature to interject between them and their bodily autonomy. Take these exemptions seriously, because they will be coming in by the plenty. Please truly and seriously protect the children suffering from impaired learning, mental health, and various other numerous disabilities facing the children in the district. The only honorable and transparent thing for you to do, in my eyes, is to use the words in the same sentence: recommended and exemption. For example, masks are recommended. Exemptions will be honored and respected. Like the exemption form into communication. It's another obstacle for bodily autonomy and medical freedom to require a physician signature. Also, you should respect religious exemptions for mask wearing. Moving forward, I urge you to uphold the non-discriminatory culture Bexley Schools is promoting by welcoming mask exemptions and writing into policy. Respect parental choice and medical freedom on the behalf of our children. You discussed social and emotional well-being of students. I picked my kids up from school every day, asked them how their day was, and they were miserable. Completely miserable. They rip their masks off as soon as they walk out of the building and go see their friends in their homes. Okay? They were miserable. And they do not want to come back to school this year. And that is terrible. For my kids not want to come back to school because of your mandate.
I'm sorry, that's for a lot of time. Thank you. Mr. Smith, call our next witness, please.
Matt Wolf.
Apologize for my casual tiredness in football practice. And unfortunately, I missed most of the meeting, but I wasn't here in time to hear what the resolution is. As I think all know, I'm against the resolution. As of this morning, when I looked at the dispatch tracker, there were 12 schools of 19 in Central Ohio who had chosen not to mandate masks. They all recommended it. They had not mandated it. Hilliard, I guess, is scheduled to be the 13th one this evening. It looks like we're recommending that we do have a mask mandate, and I can't figure out why that is. It can be because of the CDC recommendation. As Dr. Darrell pointed out last week, the CDC recommended we all show up with masks on, and nobody here did. Also, last spring, when we started school, 5 days a week in person, the CDC was still recommending that our kids be online. We listened to that, and we rejected it, and we went to 5-day in-person school. It can't be because of Bexley COVID task force guidelines, because they recommend that we don't gather, we don't have close contact with people from outside our families. So they would likely be against this meeting. They'd be against in-person school. They'd be against the board retreat yesterday. They'd be against Dr. Fine's meet and greets last week. So that's not it. The only thing I can figure out is because of the watch team. I think we need to ask ourselves how seriously we should take the advice of the watch team. One of the members of the watch team last year did a Ask the Expert put on by the city of Bexley. And this person claimed that there would be COVID until we all get really serious about masking all the time wherever we go. Which makes me wonder, does this person think that we can get to zero COVID by everybody wearing a mask? I don't think any reasonable person thinks we can achieve zero COVID. COVID's here, it'll always be here. Which begs the question, what's the off-ramp to this? When do we stop masking, if ever? But the same person had claimed that the WHO was considering approving the vaccines before vaccines obviously had been approved, or emergency approved. The WHO was considering approving vaccines that were 50 to 70% effective, and then the person claims that if everyone masked, it would be even more effective than vaccines that are 50 to 70% effective, with no safety issues. That seems laughable to me. Especially when it's claimed that there are no safety issues. As I noted last week in the WHO guidance, they list over 8 bullet points of potential harms and disadvantages of masking healthy people in the community. They also claim that they considered all available evidence on the use of masks by the general public, including effectiveness, level of certainty, and other potential benefits and harms. And they conclude, at present, there's only limited and inconsistent scientific evidence to support the effectiveness of masking healthy people in the community to prevent infection with respiratory viruses, including SARS-CoV-2. That's relevant because for some reason we act like these masks are magical and they're going to solve all our problems with COVID, but the science is clearly not clear. It is controversial. For some reason, that's not how we present it in this community, and oftentimes that's not how some of our public health officials nationally present it either. But the final straw for me for the task force is, last year when they made the recommendation to go, the watch group, to go all in 5 days a week, they did so unanimously on the condition that the school district mandate double masking. They did this based on a CDC study on mannequins. They felt so strongly about it that when Dr. Good at the time sent out an email to the community and said he was considering it, and that they were going to recommend double masking, he immediately got 2 emails that I've seen through a public records request from members of that task force. One said, the district, of course, does not need our endorsement. We're advisory. But you also cannot claim our endorsement if you change the conditions under which it was given, which is fair. Another member of the board, or the watch group, said, in anticipation of discussion tonight, here are my thoughts about double masking. I posit that double mask is a non-negotiable component of risk mitigation if students are to be spaced closer than 6 feet. There could be a waiver process that can be used to not participate like that especially students who currently don't wear masks at schools. Given the lack of physical distancing with all in and the more contagious variant that is circulating, improving masking is essential. But now the double masking recommendation has been dropped. Is there new science? Why has it been dropped? The reference study, did the dummies in the reference study catch COVID later? Did they spread it later?
Alana Spector.
Hello, my name is Alana Spector. I live at 2444 Fair Avenue. I appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight as I was not able to make the earlier meeting. I have some prepared things to say, but I have been asked via text to share a personal story of one of the residents in Bexley. This resident is a pediatrician. She allowed a 5-year-old unvaccinated child to hold her infant last week for 5 minutes outdoors. All 5 of her family members, including 2 fully vaccinated adults, tested positive for the Delta variant. This is my block. These are not probable. This happened. I've had family members this week from other parts of the country also fully vaccinated test positive and hospitalized. My thoughts today really surround know what you don't know. This is a phrase that comes out of my mouth to my family and my friends, not really infrequently. Know what you don't know. If my daughter's sick, and she's been very sick this year, I didn't self-diagnose and treat her at home. I took her to her pediatrician. When her pediatrician realized that this illness was out of his scope, he didn't treat her, he didn't diagnose her, he sent me to a specialist. He knew what he didn't know. I look around this room, I see lawyers, I see administrators, I see professionals, and unless anybody here is hiding some big secret from me, what I don't see is epidemiologists, which is a word I can never get right. And yet, these are the people that are making the decisions that impact the health, safety, and well-being of our students, staff, and community. Know what you don't know. Luckily, we have many experts at our disposal. We've already discussed ad nauseum the recommendations of the various organizations. I don't really need to repeat that. But this week, and possibly today, the Chief Medical Officer at NCH said, quote, "It is imperative that as we enter the school year, that children are masking in schools, masking indoors, and that anyone eligible for vaccines gets vaccinated. If you want to put the children first, and we should all want to put our children first, we need to get vaccinated and we need to wear masks." The people on the watch force, I think you kept saying this person, that person, these are people that are educated and experienced epidemiologists and infectious disease specialists. These are not people that we've pulled off the street. We have Dr. Abby Norris-Turner. She's an infectious disease epidemiologist with 20 years of research study, 16 months focusing on understanding the epidemiology of COVID-19 in Ohio. We have Allison Norris, who you were quoting, Ms. Wolf. She has her PhD and her MD from Yale University, done a fellowship at Hopkins, and has 15 years of experience postdoctorate. And finally, we have Dr. Ted Brasky, who also holds a master's and a PhD in epidemiology. He conducts mostly research related to cancer at the James, and he has 12 plus years of postdoctorate experience. Between the three of these people, they have more than 45 years of combined experience in this field. Nobody here should be substituting your judgment for their experience. I certainly don't intend to. I can say that these people, I'm taking a wild guess that they have never been more in demand professionally, and yet they have volunteered their time to guide this district. And I felt that some of the questions and remarks towards them at the last meeting was just disrespectful. I listened as two of your board members asked these three incredibly educated, volunteered, experienced epidemiologists if their recommendation was based upon opinion or data. That is incredibly offensive. That is like asking me if I write a legal brief based on case law or my opinion. I feel that you owe them an apology for that. But if it wasn't that enough, the two of your members asked them for the data as if you're going to go check their work. I know what you don't know. But if that wasn't bad enough, the statement of no offense, and let me tell you, when you utter the words no offense, pretty sure that whatever words are going to follow that are offensive and maybe should be rethought. No offense, but they're not medical doctors. No. Some of them are not. They're epidemiologists. They are trained to do exactly this. And I wish that you had shown them the experience, the respect for their education and experience. I heard making comparisons to Ohio State football and whether they were going to be wearing masks. Ohio State football is $1 billion industry. They might just have a few mitigation strategies up their sleeves that we don't, such as testing players on a daily basis. That's not what we're dealing with here. That's not a fair comparison. I hear people who say their students are miserable wearing masks. I had one line from one of the cast members that they wanted me to read, but I guess my time is up.
Mark Parrish.
Mark Parrish.
Parrish. I live at 640 Eau Claire in South Bexley, and I am an architect. And so I want to just thank my daughter. She drove me here tonight. I wasn't intending to be here, but she wanted to see how the sausage is made, and if I got I'm going to show her. We got here and she asked me to speak. Wasn't planning on doing that either, but we're going to do that for her as well. So I just want to start by saying I'm shocked at the poor data that I walked into at the start of this meeting, and frankly the innumeracy of it, truly galls me. I could go on for an hour correcting half of what I saw up there in the spirit of knowing what you don't know, but knowing what you do. I know numbers. That's what I do for a living. I analyze data and I put it into real world practice as part of my job. I'm going to focus on masks for the rest of my time. So what I do for a living is materials testing, materials science, fluid dynamics, all the things that masks in the real world deal with. Mask experts are not doctors. I hate saying that, but it is true, okay? Who is positioned as an expert on masking? It is people with backgrounds like myself, like PPE engineers, people who deal in particle physics and fluid dynamics day to day, and deal in testing of materials to respond to these physical limitations and just part of what is part of the natural world around us, okay? These masks, there is zero ecological data at this point showing a link between masking, community masking, and case data. There is none. I wish there were. Masking simply does not work unless we are talking about medical respirators, N95s and KN95s. If that's what we want to ask our kids to wear, good luck. I will simply note there are no certified or registered KN95s or N95s in America, okay? They do not exist. So, knowing that, where does that leave us? I am sitting here in a room tonight. We're talking on-ramps and off-ramps. As it relates to on-ramps, I'm in a room. There is, my last count, 25 people here. 20 of them are wearing masks, okay? This is a room, knowing this community, knowing the eligibility status of the people in this room, everybody here, I'd say, if I had to guess, almost everybody here is vaccinated. The fact that we are sitting here with over 80% attendance in this room, still dutifully wearing masks, is concerning. Explain to me the off-ramp in that. Never mind the children for a moment. You are the leaders, you are the decision makers, you are the role models. My daughter sitting here wearing a mask. Why? Because she's the only person here actually required to be wearing one. Crazy. Why is that crazy? Her risk as a COVID naive 8-year-old, almost 8-year-old, and rising second grader is less than mine as a fully vaccinated 40-year-old. Let me say that again. Her risk as a COVID naive 8-year-old, and I'm sorry, doctor, but it's true, is less than mine as a 40-year-old fully vaccinated, and less than everybody in this room, okay? So we need to talk about risk tolerance, and we need to put it back in the hands of individuals to make that decision for themselves. Medical autonomy is real, okay? You cannot claim, as the woman before me noted, that masks are a medical device responsible for stopping viral spread, and then at the same time require their use without medical consent. It's bonkers. Last point I want to make before I run out of time here is that, may have forgotten. I think on that note, I will leave it. And Cece, I love you, I appreciate it. I hope the board does the right thing tonight and gives you the opportunity to work with your parents to make the right decision for you and us as a family. Thanks for the time, I appreciate it.
Tim Julep? Julep. There you go.
Appreciate the time. Tim Shaluta from 167 North Remington Road. Didn't have anything prepared, came here last minute, but just to kind of piggyback on a lot of the points we've heard here tonight, my big thing is choice. We're seeing all these communities around us, 13 I think was the last count, potentially going mask optional. It just doesn't make sense with the amount of vaccination, especially in this community that we have in Bexley, to once again, require students to wear masks. Not only the social, the gentleman that just spoke before me, his young 7-year-old sounds like, the social implications, the learning implications that this child and all of the children her age and up are going to have to work through to have yet another year interrupted by wearing masks and potentially having, school activities disrupted. Who knows what's going to come down the line when you make a mask decision this early with these numbers that we heard. It's, the slippery slope is there, and that's what really concerns me. And, Ms. Mitchell mentioned that the unfortunate event of our Board of Health having, the board, you folks, make decisions when you're not doctors or, in this field whatsoever is really, it's unfortunate. It's poor leadership at the top. But this gives us, you, the opportunity to make the right decision. Be a leader. Do the right thing by these kids and make it mask optional. Thank you.
Appreciate everybody's time and sharing your thoughts with us this evening. We move on tonight to put in our board agenda to items 5A, B, C, and D. I think I'll take 5A first, and I'll take a motion a second, and then we'll discuss it. So can I please have a motion to approve item 5A? Thank you. Second. Thank you. All right, so if there are any comments, questions, anybody has anything they'd like to say about this resolution before us today, we can start. Anybody want to raise their hand? I'll do it alphabetically.
I went first last time, so I don't want to hog it, but I'll be happy to go first.
I don't feel like we're all talking.
No, that's fine. Ms. Bowers, why don't you go ahead then?
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. I want to start by saying thank you to Dr. Williams and Dr. Fine for providing all the information that we received at our last board meeting and also this evening. I'm really disappointed that we have to gather together to address this issue. Mitigating COVID-19 for this coming school year is something that I had hoped we would not have to gather to do. No one wants to require masks, or at least I can assure you that I don't want to have to do that. I understand that there may be a diversity of opinion on our board about what's appropriate, and as Marley said earlier, I'm really proud to serve on a board where I can feel confident that regardless of the outcome tonight, we will join together to honor and support the decisions. We've received a lot of communication from the community on this issue over the last several weeks, and I want to say that I am very grateful for all of the input that we've received from all different parts of the community. I'm especially grateful when that input is thoughtful, and I think we've received a lot of thoughtful input. Even since our recent board meeting on August 3rd, last Tuesday, things around public health and COVID have continued to change. While there may be some uncertainty, one thing we do know for certain is that with this virus, things do change and we have needed to be flexible. I believe we need to continue to be flexible. Last year, our school district experienced a very low rate of in-school transmission. Transmission outside of our buildings was higher, and that was talked about a little bit this evening. As noted in the data cited by the CDC and other guidance materials that have been presented to us, In our schools, as in other schools across the country, the low transmission rate was largely due to or attributable to the implementation of those mitigation and prevention measures, including masking, distancing, and sanitizing. We know that the CDC, the American Academy of Pediatrics, Ohio and Franklin County health departments all recommend indoor masking regardless of vaccination status. The CDC's recent guidance states that when COVID-19 case rates in a community are substantial, which is defined as levels of 50 cases per 100,000 or more, there is an increased risk of spread in the schools. We know that in Franklin County, community spread is currently at the substantial level, one below the top level of high. In their August 5th statement that we talked about this evening, Franklin County Public Health noted that in the last 4 weeks prior to that April 5th date, Franklin County positivity rate has more than doubled, and I think that information was shared in Harley's screens tonight. We know that Columbus Public Health and Franklin County Public Health issued a joint statement strongly recommending schools follow the CDC guidance on universal masking policies for students and staff regardless of vaccination status. In that August 5, 2021 mask advisory, Franklin County Public Health and Columbus Public Health state that, and this is sort of an answer to one of the questions that Mr. Varno raised. Quote, in Franklin County, we are now seeing substantial community transmission of the virus primarily attributable to the Delta variant, end quote. We have seen the Ohio legislation limits on the governor and Ohio Department of Health's ability to issue and enforce health orders. So they have been prevented from telling us what to do. We are also aware of the additional legislation that takes effect on October 13th that establishes that school districts cannot take into consideration a person's vaccination status. We now have the quarantine guidance that Harley went through this evening from the Ohio Department of Health, which makes it clear that quarantine is not necessary only if there is masking for students and staff regardless of vaccination status, and there is physical distancing maximized at least 3 feet between desks, and there is documenting COVID-19 prevention policies. The American Association of Pediatrics is an apolitical organization whose focus is 100% on the health of children. The American Association of Pediatrics' new guidance begins with the following statement, quote, the AAP strongly advocates that all policy considerations for school plans should start with the goal of keeping students safe and physically present in school, end quote. The AAP notes that, quote, since the beginning of this pandemic, new information has emerged to guide safe in-person learning. Remote learning highlighted inequities in education and was detrimental to the educational attainment of students of all ages and exacerbated the mental health crisis among children and adolescents, end quote. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that all students over 2 years and all school staff should wear face masks at school unless medical or developmental conditions prohibit use. For me, the most important goal is keeping our students safe and physically present in school. I believe that we should continue to follow the guidance of the CDC, the AAP, and our public health officials and experts. We are engaged in teaching children, and in that vein, I am confident in accepting the recommendations of the scientists and the professionals in the public health fields, and taking the path that will help us to keep our students learning in our buildings. For these reasons, I support the superintendent's recommendation for universal masking for all of our students, staff, and volunteers in the building during school hours. Thank you.
last year, we started the year taking recommendations from CDC, Franklin County, Ohio Department of Health, the local health department, and they all recommended that all schools stay remote. And we listened to all of those recommendations. We heard all of the professionals, the experts in the field, and we opted not to do that, not to follow that recommendation. And that turned out to be a good decision for our district because we know that the time that we did spend out of the classroom had pretty significant impacts on our students. Ms. Powers sort of alluded to that just now in her statement. We asked a lot of questions then. We asked a lot of clarifying questions, and perhaps our board received the answers they needed satisfactory in the line of questioning that the two of us asked. Maybe you received your clarification ahead of the meeting in the meetings that we often have to have. But it is what we do. We ask questions. That's what we're elected to do. We're elected to challenge the people that are making recommendations to us, not providing us mandates. So I won't ever apologize for that. I told Dr. Fine when we talked earlier today, I do not intend to support this measure. And it is not because I don't believe COVID is real. It's not because I haven't experienced it. In fact, I've experienced it 3 times in my family, and all 3 times it was quite severe. But it is also the reason that I continue to socially distance in my home, or I don't go, rather outside of my home, I don't go to large public events unmasked with groups of people. I make those decisions and choices as a parent and as a citizen, and because I have an aging parent. And I want to be able to interact with her, but I believe that that's my choice to make that decision. So I don't support this measure, not because, again, I don't believe that you didn't do the work. I believe that our data does not support this restrictive measure at this time.
Thank you. Ms. Minion.
So I'd like to start by saying thank you to our administrative team for the extensive work you have done in preparation for tonight. Information was gathered from a wide scope of both national and local sources. Okay. I'd also like to say thank you to all community members. Let me say that again. Thank you to all community members for your commitment to our children. I respect your passion. You ask questions, you share research, you offer your personal stories to support our children, mine included. And no matter where you are on this, or any other continuum, I'm grateful for the robust conversations we have as a community. I learn from you daily. I'll speak personally first. Right or left, up or down, in or out. I maybe be more comfortable being a this or that. But for sure, I have learned during the last 18 months that things can look good from one perspective, and they also look good from the other perspective. There are many, many more shades of gray than there are just black or white. In my personal life, I make the best decision I can make with the information available today. And if that information changes, I'm flexible, humble enough to change. Sometimes that's a right on time change, and sometimes that's a oops, I should have changed last week change. But I can say it's always with the intention to make my best personal decision. Which brings us to tonight. Each of you has a valid point, opinion, and feeling on this matter. I respect that, and I respect you for those points and opinions and feelings. My professional training is not in medicine, biology, immunology, epidemiology, or any of the other sciences. I have to listen both to the national and local guidance of those who do have expertise in this area. I thank again the administrators for the work they have done to gather, to help us process that information to make the most informed decision I can make. I plan on supporting the resolution.
Thank you. I usually don't write and read things, but I thought it was important enough to do that, so I don't go off script. So I have actually, and this is going to be a little bit more lengthy than everyone else, so I'll apologize because I feel like I've taken up the floor, but it is important to me to say this. There are 4 points that I want to talk about. The effects of masks on children versus infection rates. When we talk about data-driven decisions on this board, burden of proof, which comes from my legal background and personal choice of families. Those are the 4 areas I want to talk about. So I appreciate this. This is directed toward my fellow board members and to Dr. Fine in my request to have Dr. Fine either withdraw his recommendation or change his recommendation to do mask optional, or to plead with my fellow board members to vote against this resolution. That said, questions that I want to figure out is the effects of masks on children versus infection rates, symptomology, virus, and virus spread of children. I'm not a medical expert, but I'm a policy expert, being on this board for 8 years. I think I can qualify for that. This is a public policy decision. It's not a one-tier, one-factor decision on medical or anything else. We've heard a lot of different opinions, not only from our public participants, which I greatly appreciate because I know how intimidating that can be, but also from the experts that we talk about. There's great disagreement among the experts, including our own watch team on recommendations that we saw on the slides last week, when only 3 of 5 agreed on a certain point. So my question is the CDC, the Franklin County Public Health Department, or any of these organizations taking into account the detrimental effects of face masks on face masks on children, talking about face recognition and identification, communication, social emotional interaction of our children? In my view, there is more negative mental health effects on kids as a result of isolation and masking than any serious effects of COVID disease. And the vaccination of elders has greatly reduced the risk of making family members critically ill or worse, including all of us that have had the chance to be vaccinated. Even the CDC acknowledges, we know that vaccinated adults are very well protected and that healthy kids are relatively low risk of severe illness from COVID-19. There is also evidence that kids younger than 11 or 12 are much less likely than adolescents or adults to transmit the virus if infected. The WHO and the CDC have different recommendations for children under 11. So which one do we follow? The experts on the WHO or on the CDC? The Franklin County Public Health simply grasps onto the CDC's recommendation, but frankly, and I don't mind saying this publicly because I think it's a point that I strongly believe in, I put no faith in Franklin County Public Health, specifically because we've had experience with them, and including last July when we had the director of the Franklin County Public Health come in front of us and recommend no fall sports at all. I asked him what that recommendation was based upon. What was his recommendation based upon? Well, I wanted to be consistent. Not data, not health advice, not from the expert, because he wanted to be consistent. That's not science, that's not data, that's not an expert. That's somebody that is giving an opinion, a personal opinion, to make recommendations. And it was a bad opinion, and it was a bad recommendation, and thank goodness we didn't follow it. Now, by virtue of being a child, I think one of our speakers talked about that, children are more protected against the ill effects of the virus versus vaccinated individuals and adults. The vaccine does offer a great deal of protection, but being a child in and of itself offers even more. Children are less at risk for severe COVID risk and death than vaccinated adults, according to the vast amount of data that we have gathered over the last year and a half of the pandemic and the last year of vaccine research. COVID infection rates are low among the school age group, and face coverings could affect their development. Unlike other data we've gathered, we have never seen any research that indicates that masking children actually makes a dent in COVID cases. In fact, you can look at Florida, where there were schools that were mask optional, mask required. And in those cases, there were no difference in the spread of COVID, the fatality rates, hospitalizations, or anything. So when you have a control group of masking that was done in the same state, in the same general region, there was no difference in masking. In the United Kingdom, ages less than 12 have never been masked, and they just finished their Delta surge that we've talked about here tonight. The United Kingdom's fatality rate, as of my research yesterday, was 0.00044%. In the US, it was 0.00045%. So the UK fatality rate of schools that didn't mask kids under 12, their fatality rate for children was lower than the United States. Sweden had no masks for children under 16. Their population is about the same as us, 10.4 million people versus Ohio, which is 11.6 million. Sweden had 0 child fatalities. So what does indoor universal masking recommendations based upon? I would argue, and this is not a criticism of Dr. Fine or Dr. Williams, but based upon the experts that we're told to rely upon. Simply put, I think it's conjecture. Arbitrary, single-factor considerations that are wrong-headed and not right for our students. When you combine tens of thousands of data sets with hundreds of, this is a quote from Vinay Prasad, who is a hematologist, oncologist, and a health researcher, I believe he's at the University of California, San Francisco. And this quote kind of encapsulates what I believe. When you combine tens of thousands of data sets with hundreds of researchers looking at the question, analytic flexibility, and selective reporting results, this means that the resulting literature is little more than an opinion poll, which I think is what we are looking at, and Ms. Mitchell focused on about these so-called experts in the Ohio Department of Health, Franklin County Public Health, and the CDC. So when we talk about masking your children, what is the detrimental effect? I've heard not one piece of data, and that's why I asked Dr. Fine, and I'm not putting this on him. I'm putting it on the Franklin County Public Health, the CDC, and all of these other organizations. They're single focus. They don't talk about the mental and social well-being of our kids on what they should be masking, when they're masked in school, when they're not masked in school, and that has not been provided anywhere in our meetings or anything. And I'm not blaming Dr. Williams or Dr. Fine again. This is stuff that I believe Franklin County Public Health and the CDC doesn't provide. So when we talk about everything that since I've been on this board, it's about data-driven. What is the data that we have? What data do we have that masking in K through 12 is effective? We have none. There is no data out there. Since I've been on the board, at least the last 5 or 6 years, we've focused on being data-driven. And with the team that we have put together, that Dr. Fine and prior to his hiring, data team that we have put together is awesome. We look at the data, we've been provided data on numerous subjects, and we make decisions based upon data. Right now, we're not doing that. We're taking the advice of public entities that have shown their recommendations and are also arbitrary and not based on data. For instance, Dr. Boyle, who we just hired a few years ago, has provided us in the last month specific data on testing and achievement for our students and using the data to make decisions on curriculum and how we can better serve those students that most need it. This is a data-driven and informed approach to address an issue that we have in gap closing. That's the way that it should be done. With masking, there simply is not that data. It's not settled science. And again, I mentioned even 2 out of 5 of our watch team medical professionals disagree with some recommendations, including whether or not the mandatory mask for high school students. This shows what all these recommendations are our opinion, and anecdotally based and not data-based. What are cases? That's a question that I've asked that nobody can answer. You can't find it anywhere. Franklin County Public Health maybe gives you a little insight into where they come from. And this is from their data dashboard. Indicator 1, number of people with positive COVID-19 tests confirmed or have met criteria to be considered having COVID-19 but were not tested, probable, reported to Franklin County Public Health each day, and number of people with COVID-19 for every 100,000 people residing in Franklin County Public Health jurisdiction. What does that say to me? That means that they're making guesses and conjecture based upon probabilities and not confirmed tests. And we're basing our decision on these experts that can't provide that background data. In fact, as noted earlier, when you compare districts for masking versus non-masking, there's no statistical difference. There's no data to support that universal masking in schools work. And for getting into the weeds questions that I asked Dr. Fine, it wasn't about getting into the weeds and making those recommendations. It was because I wanted to show how that these policies are implemented and recommended by these policymakers and these experts at the CDC or the Franklin County Public Health or even WHO or Ohio Department of Health. In fact, our policy gives the superintendent discretion if we decide to do masking or not mask. And what this is meant to show, and I think that it did, that the arbitrary recommendations that are coming from these organizations. Ohio Governor Mike DeWine won't mandate masks, and the Ohio Department of Health won't require facial coverings in class. The Ohio Department of Education only unvaccinated students, teachers, and staff wear masks this fall, and the Center for Disease Control to provide masks for use for all K through 12 students, and Franklin County Public Health again tagged onto that. Well, who's the expert there? Ohio Department of Health, or is it the Franklin County Public Health? Is it the CDC? I again would point out what Dr. Prasad said. This is just a lot of data that anybody can use to come up with their opinion. So what data? We had 16 cases in 43209 in June and July, when everyone was traveling, getting together for summer, watching the 4th of July parade that I personally witnessed. What are the cases? Franklin County Public Health doesn't define it. They list confirmed and probable cases. So when I asked about this data, none of these entities can provide it. I can look at the data myself, and I'm not a mathematician or a statistician, but when you look at the hospital beds occupied by COVID-19 patients, this is from Franklin County Public Health, it's much lower than it even was this summer. It's at 1.8%. The goal is less than 10%. That's one data point that I could use to support my argument. Then we heard stats about the positivity rate doubling. Well, it was so low in early June and July that it's at 3.66. The goal is test positivity of less than 3%. We were above that in April and even into May. In fact, the positivity rate is about what it was toward the middle of May. You can go through all of these data points and all the information and all the charts that I have from Franklin County Public Health, and I think I can make an argument for either or both of these. When you look at the actual reported data from Franklin County Public Health, when I asked about deaths, you can look at the charts, page 3 of 6 of their charts. Their deaths, according to this, deaths in Franklin County, which I believe is about 1.32 million people, 2 in the last over month. When you look at the epidemiological curve, it's low, and a lot of that is based upon confirmed and probable cases. In fact, it's about where it was at the end of May. You can look at all of these charts and decide what stat do I like, or what stat are these public officials relying on to make recommendations. To me, the recommendations are simply opinion and conjecture. So when I get to talk about burden of proof as a lawyer, and when I'm trying a case, I talk about this to a jury. And you're my jury here, so this is my plea. The mask mandate to me is going away from the norm of children going back to school. Going back to school without wearing masks is the norm. So in my opinion, the burden of proof is on those who propose to require universal masks for everyone. Not just personal opinion or conjecture. It has to be evidence-based, data-based, data-driven, and there's simply no data to support that universal masking for every student in our district will have any kind of effect. In fact, I believe that the recommendations, and again, this is not on Dr. Fine or Dr. Williams, but the information provided by these agencies has not, in all fairness, has not met that burden of proof of mandatory masking, especially in K through 12. What data are we talking about? I'm not talking about pulling up these charts and pulling all the data together and saying, well, this says this, this says this. The data is, what data is there that wearing masks causes less transmission in schools versus not wearing masks? And there absolutely is no evidence out there, no studies, and if there was, the CDC certainly would be publishing that. In fact, when I look at our resolution, in paragraph 5 in that resolution, the whereas in there specifically says that it has been, whereas wearing masks have been proven to prevent spread of respiratory droplets that are created when people talk vaccine, and researchers have found that wearing masks combined with distancing was effective in slowing the spread of COVID-19 in schools. I can't even agree with the whereas in this resolution, let alone the recommendation, because that whereas is absolutely not true. There's no data to support that, and again, it's just conjecture based upon what the CDC or Franklin County Public Health is. One of our speakers talked about this, and this is the kind of my final highlight, and I apologize for going so long, but this is an important issue to me, so I felt like I needed to write this out and be very specific in my plea. So in the end, what I think this comes down to is a family choice. A choice to mask their own kids, kindergartners through high school seniors. It's simple. In my immediate and extended families who have almost all been vaccinated, some still wear masks, some don't. No one shames each other for their choice, either way. And as a school district, we should model that behavior. If this resolution passes, what are we telling our community? Is that we know better what you do with your children with regard to masking or not masking, and taking the decision of families out of their hands regardless of the health of their children. We all have choices, including with the online school that Ms. Abraham that's provided to us at our last meeting is fantastic, and that her team put together. It's a robust alternative for those who request to be able to do online schooling. But when you tell everybody they have to wear a mask, the families who do not want their children masked have no choice. This is a family decision, not a school board decision. I think our policy should reflect that. We should not mandate masks for our students. And with that long statement, and I appreciate your indulgence on that, I plead with you, my fellow board members, well, first of all, with Dr. Fine to withdraw your recommendation, or to change your recommendation that we have recommended masking only. My second plea is with my fellow board members who have been fantastic and are the utmost professionals, and I've even gone on the ridiculous Bexley laws to defend them because I believe that strongly in their capabilities and their work ethic, and I've experienced that on the board. All four of them should be applauded for that. We can have disagreements, we can have strong disagreements, but I'm pleading with you to reject the recommendation of Dr. Fine, which again is not a personal reflection of Dr. Fine. I think he's fantastic as well. But this recommendation is not the direction that our school district should go. I think we should not be mandating masks, and I am definitely voting against the resolution as it stands. And again, I would ask Dr. Fine to reconsider. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Farnham. I appreciate that very much.
I feel like in all the years I've known him, I don't think I've ever heard him talk that much.
All the years combined.
I think that's right.
Yeah. So I appreciate everybody's really caring about what we're doing. It is evident, and I appreciate it very much. I will just say that I do believe in personal choice and a parent's right to decide what's best for their children or any of their child. But by my view, I don't feel that it's limited, that that's a limitless right. It's not a limitless right in our in a civilized society. I believe that we're beholden to each other in a community, and in no way is that more impactful than the health and safety of each other. We have laws protecting each other from fellow citizens who choose to smoke, drink, do drugs, and exert various things that can harmfully affect others. This is no different to me than that. Masks don't protect the wearers, they protect the fellow citizens, and I respectfully disagree. I believe that I've read very good evidence that supports that masks do have an effect in preventing the spread of that. Our data is surrounding that, so that's my opinion having read what I've read. So since the masks don't protect the wearers, since they don't protect the wearers, they protect your fellow citizens. I believe that it's the behavior we should be modeling as parents and educators, that we care about each other, we do what's best for each other, and sometimes that's at the cost of some personal freedoms. The payoff to that cost, in my opinion, is that we all have greater security and ability to pursue our individual definition of happiness. So my priority as a board member is to keep our students, the 2,400 students that are entrusted in our care and my care, in our buildings, and learning from our exceptional staff. And I understand that often we've had conversations with board members that we might make different decisions as parents than we would as board members who are responsible for all of the students in our buildings. And the thing, I will admit that I've been very, that this has been a very challenging discussion and choice for all of us, I think. But what I keep coming back to is, and this is just a really practical level, it's not nearly as academic as data showing what it does and doesn't say. It's that at a practical level, if one of our kids tests positive for COVID and he's in close contact, and we don't have a universal mask rule, that whole classroom is going to get quarantined. And those kids are all going to be out of our building. And it's the practical thing that's gotten to me, is I've seen what it's done to our kids to be out of our building. I don't like the masks. I wish to God we didn't have to wear them. I can't stand wearing this. but I'm willing to do it because I think it's going to make, from the data that I've seen and the evidence that I've looked at, again, and my personal approach to it, which is what I'm called here to do tonight after listening to all the many different community members and my own research, that what's most important is keeping our kids in school. So that's where I fall on this, that I appreciate the work of our administration. I think Dr. Fine, I feel very confident, is looking for our off-ramp. And it may be around, it may come soon. I mean, I pray it comes soon. It may come around vaccine availability for younger kids. It may come around FDA approval for vaccines. You know, I don't know. What I've learned in COVID is that you don't know the symptoms. But I can, the thing I know that's going to be next is change. So I'm hoping that we will have an off-ramp soon. But until that time, I want our kids in our building learning from our staff. And that's why I will vote in favor of this tonight. So given that, I think it would make the most sense for us to, we've had a motion and a second on item 5A. We've all had the opportunity to talk. Is there anybody else who would like to have anything to say before I call this vote? Thank you. All right, so given the fact that, yes.
I'd just like to say a few words.
Oh, thank you. I did not see that.
I don't know if all of you guys know this, but I am the high school student council president, so I'm here to represent the entire student body, but specifically the high school students who I have a lot of connection with. And I think a lot of the conversations we've been having today are about the mental health of students. And I think the most damaging thing to mental health of students is being out of the classroom. I know that a lot of my friends, myself included, really hated being online. We thrive much better in the classroom environment, and I think that whatever we can do to make sure that students are in the classroom, we should do. And with the quarantine requirements, that if you're in a school that doesn't have universal masking, that the entire class has to quarantine, especially for the younger grades for unvaccinated kids. If somebody comes in contact with somebody who has COVID, really it's going to damage the learning environment for kids if they have to constantly be learning at home, switching back. I just think that it can create a bad environment for learning. And I think that it should be a priority to have kids in schools.
Can I say something, Ron?
Yes.
Gwen, I appreciate you speaking. This is not an easy first experience for you. I want to make sure that I clarify the quarantine in a classroom. So if you are unmasked in a classroom and you are in close contact, you will be removed from that classroom. Yeah. Technically, if everybody's unmasked in that space, then that classroom is quarantined. But if you are masked, you do not have to quarantine. If you are unmasked but vaccinated, you would not have to quarantine. I just want to make sure that that's clear as we talk about quarantine. But just you speaking up says a lot about the role that you're in. And I'm sure your classmates were proud, regardless of the stance that you've made, that you've made your voice and their voice heard.
Can I ask a question on what you just said?
Yeah.
So in the high school, every kid that has had a chance to be vaccinated could have been vaccinated.
Right.
And if they're vaccinated and they're in the classroom and they're in close contact with somebody with COVID, they will not be quarantined. Is that correct?
Vaccinated, again,
But the other catch to that is that they would have to voluntarily tell us that because we can't ask people about their vaccine status and we can't prove that.
Correct.
We don't have an opportunity to prove it. And after October 13th, there's no decision that can be made because the House bill that requires the cancer to make it to determine the vaccine or not.
So that's my question about if you're vaccinated, you can avoid being quarantined by being vaccinated.
That's why vaccination is so important.
Yes. Vaccinated with masks or vaccinated.
Excuse me, this is only.
Yes.
Excuse me. No, I'm sorry.
I
Who you directed?
Yeah, I was asking him to clarify. If you can clarify Yeah, because the quarantine restriction is always tripping me up
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
To just clarify, if you are, say it again, if you are in a classroom,
I think it's really helpful to look at that flow chart that Dr. Williams provided.
it's hard to see.
That one is actually a little bit better.
Go to it.
It's slide number 15.
I gotta go back to my email.
Slide 14.
You said 14.
Yeah.
Pops up as 15.
And 15 is the, if
It's the
this,
flow
then.
chart that's really hard to read.
Yeah.
So my question for you, Dr. Fine, was that, I'm not saying that, the quarantine restrictions are from, this is from the Ohio Department of Health,
Yep.
that if someone has a COVID exposure in schools, it's either, if they're either masked or they're vaccinated, they are not quarantined. It's one or the other, it's not both.
You have to have these three things in place for if you look at the top of that, does the school have all of the following in place? Masking for students and staff, regardless of vaccination status. Strategies to maximize the physical distancing at least 3 feet between desks. And a documented COVID-19 prevention policy.
All of those things, then the individuals can remain safely in normal in-person classroom seating and participating in extracurricular and sport activities.
Follow the ESS.
And this flow chart will be made, like, extrapolated out of that and made it easy for parents to follow along.
Yeah. Thanks, Marla.
Thank you. All right. Then going back, we have a motion and a second on 5A. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign.
No.
No.
Thank you. That motion carries 3-2 vote. So we're moving on in our agenda items tonight. We've got just a few brief items we need to go with. We have administrative job description and stipend. This is the health support RV, CCSOS. Online school. And that is the only item up for under 5C. So can I have a motion to approve item 5C?
So moved.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Thank you. This is a personal item. Mr. Smith, would you please have a roll call vote for us?
Ms. Mitchell?
Yes.
Mr. Barnum?
Yes.
Ms. Minio?
Yes.
Ms. Powers?
Yes.
Ms. Snowden?
Yes. Thank you. So we're at the portion of our meeting tonight that we will move into executive session. I do want to note that after executive session, we can come back and vote on our OC contract, which is a negotiated agreement with some of our employees. It's our only plan for vote after our executive session. But given that, I would now like to entertain a motion to enter into executive session under Ohio Revised Code 121.22 to consider with respect to public employees, preparing, conducting, or reviewing a negotiation or bargaining sessions with public employees concerning their compensation or other terms and conditions thereof. That was long-winded. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. That motion carries. All right.
So moved.
Second. Thank you. All in favor of approving item 7A, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Thank you, that motion carries. Can I have a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting? Second. Thank you. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.